Goichi Suda, writer, director, some might say genius, others madman, founder of Grasshopper Manufacture and purveyor of always unique, sometimes controversial video game titles such as Killer 7, Lollipop Chainsaw, Shadows of the Damned, and, at this point in his career, probably most famously, the No More Heroes series. Suda 51, as he's more well known. The 51 is a pun on his first name, Go and Ichi being 5 and 1 in Japanese, has a reputation that precedes him. But even before he reached international success with the stylishly absurd Killer 7 in 2005, Suda had been making waves in the Japanese game industry with quirky adventure games and visual novels that dripped with style and atmosphere. Prior to heading Grasshopper Manufacture, Suda started his career at Human Entertainment, the developer who created the Clock Tower series, and after a successful stint directing Human's popular wrestling game franchise, of all things, he was given the opportunity to work on the Syndrome series. These games, especially the third one, are seen as the real beginning of Suda's unique approach to presentation and storytelling. Unfortunately, none of them are available in English in any form. For regular viewers of this channel, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but for anybody new, I live in Japan and have lived here for over a decade, so I thought, hey, I can play through these 3 games, Twilight Syndrome Search, Twilight Syndrome Investigation, and Moonlight Syndrome, and share my experience with others who can't. It'll be fun to break down these games and show people the beginnings of a lot of the themes that Suda would go on to develop for the rest of his career. It'll be a good idea. It'll be a good idea. Twilight Syndrome is a spooky urban legend paranormal investigation adventure game / quirky Japanese high school girl simulator, developed by Human Entertainment and released in 2 parts throughout 1996. Twilight Syndrome was originally planned as one complete game, but due to some mismanagement and lack of disk space, Human Entertainment was forced to divide the game in half. The first part, subtitled Tansakuhen, or Search Chapter, came out on March 1st, and the second, Kyumehen, or Investigation Chapter, followed on July 19th. Moonlight Syndrome, a sequel that's since been retconned as a side story and not considered part of the official Syndrome canon anymore, was released on October 9th, 1997. All 3 of these games have never been released outside of Japan, and as of the making of this video, have not received an English fan translation. Apparently, a Spanish translation of Moonlight Syndrome is in the works, with the prologue scenario currently in beta, so if you speak or read Spanish, you can look into that. Unfortunately, the only other language besides English that I can speak and read is Japanese. Woe is me, right? I've played through plenty of games in Japanese on my own, but I've never attempted to play through and analyze one for a video on the channel, let alone 3. And because I'm me, I've chosen some of the more difficult games to tackle. Not so much Twilight Syndrome. They're maybe intermediate level as far as language comprehension goes. There's some historical stuff and other concepts that are a bit challenging to grasp, but those weren't that tough. Moonlight Syndrome though, oh boy. I mean, even if there was an English translation, this game would still be a confusing, mind-bending, kaleidoscopic spectacle. It is pretty much the first game Suda 51 had complete creative control over after all. I had originally planned to only play a bit of the Twilight Syndrome games, just to get some footage while I talked about the development history and Suda's involvement, but then I started playing them and got completely absorbed. So I ended up finishing both games and getting the best endings on every scenario, ensuring that I unlocked the bonus scenario at the end of the second game. And I'm really glad I did all of that, for reasons that I'll go into later. But first, let's talk about where these games came from. The Twilight Syndrome project actually began as an extension of an arcade machine that Human Entertainment's amusement division had developed called Grandish Manor. It was a completely aural experience. People would wear headphones and listen to creepy noises and sound effects that were recorded using what they called at the time 3D audio. Grandish Manor turned out to be a huge success for the company, and they started to imagine how they could combine that sound technology with images and interactivity to create a complete game. Since they had had prior success in the horror genre with Clock Tower on the Super Famicom, the developers at Human decided an adventure game format would be best suited for this kind of project. The team decided to set Twilight Syndrome in a school because they remembered the urban legends and ghost stories that surrounded their own school days and felt that concept would appeal to both both younger and older audiences alike. For the player character, the team opted for a trio of high school girls that in most instances move as a group through the playable sections of the game. They took great care to give each girl a distinct personality, allowing them to clash with one another throughout the course of their investigations, adding a bit of character drama to the otherwise straightforward supernatural tales. To capture an authentic feeling in the dialogue between the characters, an advertising company Human worked with hired some high school girls to sit in a restaurant and chat with each other about various topics for a few hours. The writers listened in on the conversations, taking notes and picking up key phrases and nuances of the language the girls used when talking to each other. They then used those notes as the basis for the three main girls' interactions in the game. The image of some most likely 20-something game devs eavesdropping on the conversations of high school girls in a restaurant is both hilarious and a little bit creepy. But it paid off, and after the writing was complete, a senior female member of the staff checked over the finalized script to ensure the dialogue sounded as authentic as possible. Honestly, the three main characters' personalities and sometimes conflicting relationships are what got me really invested in the Twilight Syndrome games to begin with. And it's what drove me to complete them when originally this video was just meant to be about Moonlight Syndrome. As for the urban legends and ghost stories that the girls investigate throughout the game, well, as I said, they're pretty typical, and you'll easily be able to guess their outcomes most of the time. They're still well told though, and paced really well, with a creeping sense of dread throughout them. But it's ultimately the characters that kept things engaging. For character movement, the developers hired high school-aged models and filmed them walking around and interacting with objects in front of a blue screen. They also claimed that they listened in on the actresses' conversations while filming to get more notes on dialogue as well. Instead of using motion capture, the team went through the live-action footage one frame at a time and animated each of the characters by hand, or by computer with 2D sprites, but you know what I mean. This footage you're seeing is from The Memorize, a special behind-the-scenes bonus disc that was released alongside the second game. Twilight Syndrome had a bit of a long and troubled production cycle. Due to this, the original director, whose name I couldn't find, had to step down due to scheduling conflicts, reportedly. So about halfway through, Human assigned up-and-coming game director and scenario writer Goichi Suda to take over the role of director for Twilight Syndrome. Even at this early point in his career, Suda had made something of a name for himself by directing 2 installments in Human Entertainment's popular wrestling series, Fire Pro Wrestling. In fact, Suda's first assignment after being hired by Human Entertainment was to direct Super Fire Pro Wrestling 3 Final Bout for the Super Famicom. Due to the game's success, Suda was allowed to write the scenario for the next game in the series that he directed, Super Fire Pro Wrestling Special. At the outset, it seems fairly standard. You take the role of a rookie wrestler who works his way up the ranks, taking on opponents inspired but not officially licensed by popular WWF, WCW, and Japanese pro wrestling organizations. However, as the game's story progresses, things get gradually darker. Your character suffers scripted defeats, your coach is murdered, and you end up accidentally killing your best friend during a match. Before the final championship deciding bout with Dick Slender, yep, you heard that right, modeled after real-life wrestler Ric Flair, your girlfriend breaks up with you. Dick kills your tag team partner in the ring and reveals that he was also the one who murdered your coach. You emerge victorious from the final match, the new champion of the world, but everyone you've ever cared about is dead or has left you. So despite your new title and the adulation of the crowd, 3 days later, thus the Goichi Suda we all know and love was born. Since Suda was brought onto Twilight Syndrome about halfway through development, much of the writing and planning for the game was already finished, so he had little creative input on the project. His job was to see that the game was completed swiftly, and despite his now auteur status, by all accounts, he was a consummate professional. I don't know. I guess I just assumed because of the style of his later games and their strict adherence to Suda's singular vision that he might be a bit overbearing and difficult to work with. But on Twilight Syndrome, it sounds like everything went pretty smoothly after he got involved. And even though he had little input on the overall game, you can catch glimpses of his developing visual style and knack for artistic timing throughout, specifically in the title sequences and pacing of certain scenes. Twilight Syndrome is broken up into chapters called rumors, each one dealing with an urban legend or paranormal tale that the three main characters investigate. When it came time to pack these scenarios onto a PlayStation disc, the team found that there wasn't enough space, so it was decided that Twilight Syndrome would be split into 2 releases. The first 4 rumors were released as Tansakuhen, Search, while the second release, Kyumeihen, Investigation, included the remaining scenarios along with a few new ones to balance out the total number of rumors to 10. Technically, the first game has 6 scenarios though, because of a prologue that starts the game and an extra scenario called Another Rumor that unlocks after completing the 4th one. Though, that Another Rumor is actually really important, because it acts as a cliffhanger that leads into the 5th scenario that kicks off the second game. Suda mentioned in an interview shortly after the second game's release that they had to rework some of the finished scenarios to accommodate for the new release structure, and it's also mentioned that he was involved in some of the rewrites, but he's not credited as a writer for any of the main rumors. As I mentioned earlier though, there is a bonus rumor on the second game that only unlocks if you've achieved the best endings on all of the main scenarios in both games. You just have to have the save files on the same memory card. That bonus rumor was completely written and directed by Suda, and you can tell. Twilight Syndrome centers on 3 students at the fictional Hinashiro High School. Yukari Hasegawa is a second-year student whose parents have recently divorced. She lives with her mother, who works long hours to support the 2 of them. Alimony laws are pretty much non-existent in Japan, by the way. Even today. Yukari and her mother don't get along too well. Yukari has a strong yet cold outer shell that hides her insecurities and abandonment issues. She used to belong to the school's basketball club, but has quit going. She's also secretly dating a 20-year-old teacher in training at the school named Kazuya Kitamura. Her best friend is Chisato Itsushima. The 2 have been classmates since elementary school. Chisato is a member of the school's archery club. She's quiet and thoughtful, and it's shown on several occasions that Chisato has some level of psychic ability. She has a strong connection to the spirit world, or other side as it's referred to in-game. Finally, there's Mika Kishi, a first-year student who has an interest in rumors and the supernatural. It was she who started the unofficial paranormal investigation club, kind of forcing her way into Yukari and Chisato's friendship. She takes photos and recordings sometimes during their adventures and sends them to paranormal magazines for a bit of extra money. She belongs to the badminton and lacrosse clubs at school. She's very energetic and is sometimes depicted as a bit of an airhead, but that may also be a way of portraying her as younger and more naive than Yukari and Chisato. Yukari often treats Mika coldly and acts annoyed when Mika bothers her and Chisato with rumors and ghost stories, but it's clear that Yukari is also interested in those rumors and actually cares about Mika. Their friendship develops and deepens as the games continue. There are several instances where the girls get on each other's nerves, argue with each other, and even leave each other behind in certain situations. I feel like these contentious moments add depth to their characters and just makes them more interesting. I always find internal conflict between main characters really engaging. It's way better and more realistic than everyone just being buddy-buddy all the time. In one rumor, when Yukari angrily leaves Mika alone at a haunted train station and forces Chisato to leave with her, you feel genuine worry for Mika's safety as you're forced to take control of her and wander the platform alone, before the girls eventually reunite and apologize to each other. There's one more character who plays an important role in some of the girls' investigations, and that's the paranormal researcher Aramata. He's never seen in-game, at least not in the Twilight Syndrome games, but he's an acquaintance of Mika's, probably through the paranormal magazines that she sends her photos and audio recordings to. Mika can choose to contact him by phone during certain scenarios, and he'll usually give long-winded explanations of history or other supernatural events that may or may not contain hints on how to progress in the current investigation. Aramata will play a slightly larger role in Moonlight Syndrome, so it's worth mentioning him here. A typical scenario in Twilight Syndrome opens with Mika roping Yukari and Chisato into investigating a rumor she's heard about the school or the town, and the 3 of them then go off searching these locations for clues. You'll mainly control Yukari, with the other girls following along, but there are times where they split up or are separated, and you'll end up controlling either Mika or Chisato. Though the game is played on a 2D plane with sprite-based characters, the environments in the game are 3D, giving it a 2.5D presentation. And there are some neat instances where you move forward or backward through a hallway in the school, through a connecting corridor, or up and down stairs. It all adds just a little bit of depth, quite literally, to an otherwise 2D game. It's nothing mind-blowing, but I liked the effect. Hinashiro High School, where several of the investigations take place, has both a new school building and an older building. Both give off different levels of creepiness. Fully illustrated 2D scenes also crop up from time to time, and I really liked the style of these. They had a lot to the spooky atmosphere. I also love the girls' walking animations. You can tell the girls' personalities just at a glance thanks to their distinctiveness. Yukari out in front stoically mans the flashlight, leading the way for the other two. Chisato in the middle has her arms crossed, showing off her quietness and communicating her sensitivity to the spirit world. She often comments that it's cold or she feels some sort of presence around them. Mika usually takes up the rear with her bright yellow backpack as she swings her arms in an almost carefree manner. There is a run button, mapped to X on the PlayStation controller, but it's only available in certain situations, so for a lot of the game you're forced to walk through the environments, which adds to the tension and immerses you more in the experience. If you were a Japanese high school girl investigating some creepy rumor about your school or town at night, would you be running around everywhere? I mean, maybe you would, I don't know you, but I wouldn't. The rumors all have branching story paths, which deviate through dialogue and action choices at certain points. These lead to 3 different resolutions for each rumor, a good, normal, and bad ending. After you complete a rumor, you can choose to replay it from a selection menu, so you can try for different endings. During exploration, there's a heart meter at the top of the screen. The heartbeats will get faster as you witness scary events, and if it gets too high, it leads to a game over. As mentioned, Mika likes to take photos and audio recordings. In the first game, this comes up as a choice sometimes, but in the second game, the R1 and R2 buttons are dedicated to these actions. During one scenario in the second game, stopping to try to photograph or record too many supernatural occurrences can end up pushing the heart rate meter too high. Some choices in the scenarios can also put you in a game over state. This seems to be more prominent in the second game than in the first. Music usage is fairly minimalistic throughout Twilight Syndrome, but I liked what I heard for the most part, even though it's not all that memorable. Certain story sequences have music, and the tracks are used effectively. During more intense moments, the music ramps up appropriately. The dialogue in the Twilight Syndrome games are mostly not voiced, but there are a few more significant moments where the girls' lines are voice acted. These scenes add some oomph to the storytelling, but the voiced parts aren't subtitled, which is a bit annoying. The acting is good though.
王さん、今日はどうしてそんなに母さんの肩持つの？いつも喧嘩ばっかしてるの。ゆかり、せっかくのあなたの入学式じゃない。記念に撮っておきましょうよ。変だよ。なんか不自然だよ、こんなの。The sound effects and overall sound design are really where Twilight Syndrome shines. Footsteps, laughter, and other voices were recorded using the 3D audio technique that Human had put to use in Grandish Manor. All those tricks are pretty simplistic by today's standards, using dummies with microphones in their ears to simulate being spoken to from different directions, walking around the room at various distances from the microphone to make footsteps sound closer or farther away, but it's still cool to hear in the game. There are also several sounds that probably won't come through in a YouTube video. For example, an extremely low chiming sound plays during exploration. It's something that you don't really notice at first, but creeps up on you as you continue sinking into the game's atmosphere. Twilight Syndrome doesn't have many of those edge-of-your-seat interactive scares that dominate survival horror games, but to be fair, the first part predates Resident Evil by a few weeks. What Twilight Syndrome does have is a spooky, lonely atmosphere that really wraps itself around you. Its slow pacing and quietness make you feel like you're actually trudging through your empty school at night, with the rumor that drew you here pulling you deeper into the darkness. Now, the point of this video is to show off these games for non-Japanese speaking players, and to deep dive into their stories. So I think it goes without saying, but just in case, I'm going to completely spoil all 3 of these games. So if you're holding out hope for fan translations someday, it's about time to tune out. Otherwise, let's get started.
Kansakuhen, or Search, contains mostly self-contained storylines, though there are elements from some of them which carry over to the second game and even crop up in Moonlight Syndrome. The prologue has the girls investigating the rumor of Hanako, which is actually a pretty common ghost story in a lot of Japanese schools. No matter where you are in the world, you'll probably recognize the broad strokes. According to school lore, Hanako was a young girl who died in one of the girls' bathrooms in the old school building. There's a stall that's permanently out of order, and rumor has it that you can summon Hanako at night by performing certain actions in front of said stall. One of the more interesting nuances about this scenario is that the girls discover the initial rumor of how to summon Hanako is actually wrong. The story they hear is that you have to spin around 3 times and knock on the stall door. But after some investigating, they discover you need to spin around 3 times and repeat the phrase "kick, kick, tom, tom, kick, tom, tom" to get Hanako to show herself. Kick obviously means to kick, and ton ton is an onomatopoeic phrase for knocking or just making noise in general. Anyway, even this doesn't seem to do the trick at first, and there's a humorous moment afterwards where the girls decide to go home, but Yukari has to pee before they leave. As she washes her hands in the sink, the ghost chases the girls out of the bathroom, and this is one of the only instances where you need to make use of the run button. Then there's a first-person chase sequence where you need to keep choosing to climb the stairs. The girls end up getting stuck in a loop going between the 2nd and 3rd floors of the building. Eventually, after choosing to climb the stairs enough, they'll wind up on the roof. The prologue ends on a cliffhanger, not showing how the girls actually escape from Hanako. Hell of a way to start your horror game. All of the following descriptions of the rumors in both Twilight Syndrome games are based on the best endings. I feel like going through every ending is a bit unnecessary and would make this video much longer than it already is. But just know, there are other ways these stories can play out, some of them really interesting and unsettling. The first main rumor of the game deals with Inokashira Park, which turns out to have been an execution ground in older times. As far as I could find, this is not true of the actual Inokashira Park, located in the Kichijoji suburb of Tokyo. Also, the park in the game uses different kanji for Inokashira than the one in real life, and the full name of the park is different. Fun fact though, Kichijoji is the model for the town of Hinashiro in the game, and was the location of Human Entertainment's offices back when they were still in business. The second rumor revolves around a female student who committed suicide and her love affair with the school's music teacher. This one is paced really well, and structurally speaking is probably the strongest of the scenarios in the first game. There are several great moments during their investigation, including discovering writing from the departed female student scratched into the wall of the music teacher's office, which the teacher has hidden behind a calendar. Mika gets possessed by the ghost girl at one point, and Yukari and Chisato need to make a phone call to the music teacher to convince him to come to the school at night to put the girl's spirit to rest. This involves choosing the correct conversation options so that he doesn't hang up on you. It's really tense and requires quite a bit of thought to figure out the right options. Well, I should also mention the dialogue choices are on a timer for everything in this game, so if you take too long, the game will choose whatever the cursor is lingering on. Successfully convincing the teacher that the girl's spirit has returned will have him come to the school so he and the girl can reconcile. At the end, there's a callback to the calendar with the scratched notes on the wall replaced by a single phrase, "Arigato, sensei." The third rumor has the girls investigating the fictional Murayamadai station and the story of a train that departs in the middle of the night from track 4. The station only has 3 tracks, by the way. Again, another well-paced adventure that sees the girls dealing with some interpersonal drama, which I mentioned earlier, as well as running into several ghosts. You could pretty much guess the ending of this one from the start. The girls realize that the final train is actually taking wandering souls to the afterlife, and when they refuse to board, it departs, leaving them standing in a graveyard next to the station. I really like this one though, one of the most memorable rumors for me. The girls then investigate these 7 mysteries of Hinashiro High School, which all end up having logical explanations, and some even have humorous outcomes. The final rumor, In Search, isn't numbered and features only one ending. It's called Another Rumor and concerns a desk in a corner of the school library that has a mysterious note etched into it, as if it were addressed to someone. Mika starts to write her own responses, and new notes appear on the desk in reply to her writings. Eventually, this leads her to Hinashiro Grove, to meet with the spirit who's been communicating with her. Yukari and Chisato, worried about Mika, end up discovering the identity of the spirit. She's a girl who died in the 60s named Sakura Himagami, and she was the last victim of the town's history of ritualistic sacrifices. Yukari and Chisato rush to the grove and find Mika standing on a cliffside. Hell of a way to end your horror game. Kyumehen, Investigation, picks up where Search left off. Since both games were intended as one originally, this second release plays exactly the same, though they changed the design of the heart meter at the top of the screen, and not for the better. Looks like something out of a sci-fi game now. It's weird. But anyway, Yukari and Chisato's search for the missing Mika lead them to uncovering the truth behind the town's name and its dark history. In the game, Hinashiro is written with these kanji. The first part, Hina, is the word for traditional Japanese dolls, usually displayed during the Dolls Festival, also called the Girls Festival, held on March 3rd. In this case, the word Hina is interchangeable with doll or girl. The second kanji, Shiro, is the word for castle. However, as Yukari and Chisato discover, the town's original name used a different kanji for Shiro, this one meaning to change or substitute. In fact, in certain parts of Japan, at certain shrines, instead of Hina being put on display, they're placed in a wooden boat and floated downriver as part of an old ritual to protect from bad luck and disasters. In the case of Hinashiro, they started out by floating dolls downriver, but eventually substituted them for young girls used as human sacrifices. When Yukari and Chisato head to Hinashiro Grove to search for Mika, they come across many Hina floating on the bank of a small river. Attempting to interact with the dolls leads to a game over. This history of the town and the idea of substitution will become extremely important elements in Moonlight Syndrome, which is why I've gone into such detail mentioning it here. It also illustrates how a playthrough of Twilight Syndrome can help to further deepen Moonlight Syndrome's experience. Anyway, Sakura Himegami, the final sacrifice, ends up not actually being a malevolent spirit. She's just lonely and wanted Mika to follow her to the other side. After Yukari and Chisato reveal Sakura's identity to Mika, Sakura abandons the idea of having Mika join her, not wanting Mika to waste her precious life and follow her into death. The experience deeply affects Mika, even though she finally agrees to leave Sakura and return to the world of the living. The sixth rumor deals with the ghost of a boy who was bullied and committed suicide. His spirit now haunts the equipment room in the school's gym, and most students believe this is the cause of several accidents that have occurred in the gym. In the post-release interview I mentioned earlier, Suda comments how this story was quite risque and experimental for a video game, and wonders how players will react to it. Through their investigations into the rumor, the girls discover that the boy was a member of the basketball club, and a group of fellow club members, led by a kid named Saeki, told him they were his friends, but would regularly steal his money and beat him up in the equipment room after practice. This group of bullies even had the kid's mother convinced that they were his friends. Like the other scenarios, there are 3 different ways things can play out, but even the best one leaves a lot of questions. The spirit of the boy leaves the school, but it doesn't seem like he's really able to accept that his bullies weren't really his friends. It's sad. Telephone call, the 7th rumor, is a unique one. The gameplay portion of the scenario takes place entirely in Yukari's bedroom. In the beginning, her mother is working late, so Yukari is home alone. At midnight, Yukari receives a phone call from a girl, who basically just keeps saying, "Hey," like trying to get her to listen, over and over. Yukari thinks this is some kind of crank call, so she hangs up. The next day at school, Mika and Chisato both tell her that if she receives a phone call at midnight, the dead are calling, and she shouldn't hang up. Throughout this scenario, the phone continually rings, with some calls being legitimate. Yukari's mother phones at one point to let her know she'll be home late again. A delivery person calls to reschedule a package delivery. Chisato calls to check up on Yukari and give her details as she further investigates the situation. But as the evening wears on into night, Yukari's radio starts to malfunction. Her clock keeps stopping, and time starts to warp. She starts receiving more disturbing phone calls, like one with just a howling wind that starts to sound more like a demonic voice the more you listen to it. And another with a man laughing maniacally on the other end. One neat thing about the phone calls is you only hear the audio through the left channel of your speakers, as if you're holding a receiver to your ear. Not only is this rumor a change of pace from the investigation format of the others, it also reveals a lot about Yukari's character, her strained relationship with her mother, and her own insecurities. Yukari's voice starts to lose confidence as the calls keep coming in, and she keeps answering the phone.
はい、長谷川です。もしもし、長谷川です。はい、長谷川です。もしもし、もしもし。
By talking to Chisato and investigating an old photo album in Yukari's room, we begin to piece together the identity of the mystery caller. Yukari's mom calls again to ask Yukari if she remembers a girl named Sachiko. The name triggers something in Yukari's memory, and she recalls a girl she used to play with when she was younger. The girl, nicknamed Sachan, was often sick. The two made a promise together as kids, but Yukari's family moved away. Yukari's mom reveals that Sachiko died the night before, succumbing to her illness. Yukari then realizes that Sachiko is the girl who's been trying to call her. Sachiko calls again.
さっちゃん、さっちゃんなんでしょ？どうしたの？
ゆかりちゃん、あたし死んじゃったの。ごめんね。ごめんね。ごめんね。約束守れない。ごめんね。
いいよ。もういいよ。さっちゃん。あ
たし行かなくちゃ。バイバイゆかりちゃん。
バイバイさっちゃん。
The history of World War II-era tunnels and a secret weapons base beneath the town is the subject of the 8th rumor. This one unravels in an interesting way, since it turns out there's actually an old dude from World War II era who has lived down in the tunnels since the war, subsisting on stockpiled canned goods. He's convinced by the spirit of the general who ran the place that the war is still on. In another dialogue choice puzzle, the girls need to convince him that the war ended long ago. The ninth rumor is another romp around the school. The girls unwittingly open a portal for spirits to find their way into the living world, and then must figure out a way to exorcise them from the premises. This is the one I mentioned where there are a bunch of scary events to photograph or record, but if you try to do all of them, the heart monitor will get too high and you'll end up with a game over. There's some really creepy moments in this one though. Ultimately, the ending depends on where the girls go to perform their exorcism ritual, which is decided through another dialogue choice puzzle. I like these a lot actually. They're well constructed and really make you think about the answers you choose. Picking the entrance of the building to perform the exorcism is what will cleanse the school for good. Finally, there's the 10th rumor, the town on the other side. This story begins in Yukari's dream, where she sees a little girl in a park repeatedly going down a slide. The next morning, she learns from her mother that a young girl named Chikako has gone missing, disappearing from a local park where she was playing, and there are rumors that she was spirited away. Being spirited away, or kami kakushi, literally hidden by the gods, is a popular myth originating deep into Japanese history, and similar stories can be found in many cultures throughout the world to give a reason to unsolved disappearances. Back to Twilight Syndrome though, after talking to Chisato and Mika about Chikako's disappearance, the girls decide to investigate the playground after school where Chikako was last seen. Yukari mentions that she saw a girl going down the slide in her dream. After a conversation about repeating actions in threes, much like how they spun around 3 times in front of Hanako's stall in the school bathroom, Yukari decides to go down the slide 3 times. The girls then quickly realize they're not in Hinashiro anymore, at least not any version of it that they recognize, and the people here seem to have forgotten who they are and why they're here. As Yukari, Chisato, and Mika continue to explore this strange version of Hinashiro, they begin to realize that they're forgetting things about their own lives. Their homeroom teacher's face, their classmates, their families. Chisato realizes that they're actually in the town's memories. The people here are shaping it to fit the way they remember it, which is why everything is older looking. After passing through several repeating streets of houses, wind chimes, and back alleys, they eventually meet an old woman resting on a bench who tells them that this town is called O-Higan Machi. Higan is a Buddhist holiday celebrated at both the spring and autumnal equinox, symbolizing the cycle of death and rebirth. In Japanese, Higan means equinox, but in Chinese it reads as distant shore or other side, which is actually a translation of the Sanskrit phrase meaning other side. In other words, the afterlife. The old woman explains that the people in this town are waiting to cross a bridge to the other side. They stay in O-Higan Machi until all of their earthly attachments are forgotten, so they can cross the bridge with no regrets and enter the afterlife peacefully. The girls explain that they aren't dead yet, and aren't meant to be here. They ask the old woman if there's any other way out of the town, but the old woman says the only way to leave is by crossing the bridge. At that moment, thunder sounds, and the girls are transported to a Western-style church. Inside, they enter a confessional, and speak to a priest who tells them that if they really are still alive, they need to search within themselves to find a way to escape the town. Yeah, great advice. He also warns that if they happen upon a bridge, whatever they do, don't cross it. After leaving the church, the girls find themselves walking along a riverside. There's a touching moment here where they promise each other that no matter how much they forget about their lives and the other people in the living world, they won't forget about each other. Then they discover the bridge. Chisato and Mika say they need to find another way, but Yukari is drawn to the other side and crosses. Chisato and Mika decide to go visit the priest again. As they turn around to head back in the direction that they think the town is in, they find an isolated train station. Mika wonders if they should board the train or not, worrying whether it will take them back to the town or somewhere else entirely. Chisato says there's no guarantee that if they kept walking they'd ever make it back to the town anyway, so the train is their only option. Luckily for the two of them, the train does indeed take them back. They return to the church where the priest tells them that he expected Yukari to be the one to cross the bridge because she's full of doubt and insecurities. Chisato and Mika are then returned to the real world. Yukari, now on the other shore, experiences scenes from her past. She sees her school and other locations in town that the girls have visited during their investigations. She winds up inside the school, and as she walks through the empty halls, memories assault her. She sees a memory of Kazuya, her teacher in training boyfriend, breaking up with her because of the inappropriateness of their relationship. During the breakup, the Yukari in the memory acts cool, like she's fine with it all happening, answering Kazuya with measured responses, even insulting him at one point. But the Yukari who watches this memory play out doesn't want Kazuya to leave her. She doesn't want to be left alone. Further on, Yukari experiences the memory of her father telling her about her parents' decision to get a divorce. Much like with Kazuya, the Yukari in the memory tells her father that she'll be okay, that she's fine with the divorce. She doesn't want to cause trouble for her mother and father, but inside she pleads for her father not to leave her. There are more memories, meeting Chisato for the first time when they were young, her first day of high school when both of her parents attended the opening ceremony and pretended to be happy and friendly to one another. She sees the first time she met Mika, earlier in the school year. Yukari was cold toward her, but Mika was persistent, determined to be friends. Yukari eventually finds herself in the girls' bathroom on the 3rd floor of the old school building, the place where the whole game started. She performs the ritual from the beginning of the game, then goes to the roof. Hanako appears and asks Yukari why she's here. Hanako says she isn't supposed to be here. This is a world of never-ending dreams. Yukari expresses doubt about going home, saying that there's no one waiting for her there. Hanako tells her that she can stay here and play with her if she wants, but this isn't where she's supposed to be. There are people waiting for her in the real world. When Yukari finally remembers Chisato and Mika and resolves to leave this place, Chikako, the lost little girl, appears, and she and Yukari return to the world of the living. The girls are reunited on the rooftop of the school, and the credits roll. In a post-credits scene, we see the girls at school again, with Mika bursting into Yukari and Chisato's classroom to inform them of a new rumor she's heard. And that's pretty much the end of Twilight Syndrome. The final rumor brings the game full circle with the inclusion of Hanako, the ghost girl from the prologue, and reveals that she wasn't a malevolent spirit after all, which is most likely how the girls were able to escape from her way back in the beginning. Moonlight Syndrome is going to slightly rework the role of Hanako, but we'll talk about that when it comes up later. However, as I've already mentioned, finishing both Twilight Syndrome's search and investigation with the best endings in every rumor will unlock a bonus scenario called Prank. Now, from the title, I thought this was just going to be something silly like the UFO endings of Silent Hill, a lighthearted extra to cap off the game. And man, I couldn't have been more wrong about that. In Prank, you take control of Mika. One morning as she walks to school, a strong wind blows, and yellow dust encircles her. Mika smells something strange in the air, but is more concerned about people being able to see her panties, as she's wearing a skirt on such a blustery day. She hurries to school and tells Yukari and Chisato about her strange experience. Yukari laughs it off, but Chisato is more serious, warning Mika that yellow dust is the sign of fairies. They like to play pranks on people who are happy. Mika is curious, but as Chisato begins to explain more, she suddenly grows quiet. That's a lot of ellipses. Then she says she needs to go home and runs off. Yukari chases after her. Later that night, Mika walks home along a river. The moon is freaking huge in the background, and she passes a mysterious boy. She comments to herself that he looks weird, but notices, as he walks past, that he has the same scent that she caught on the wind in the morning. When she turns back to meet him, he's disappeared. The next day at school, Yukari and Chisato seem not to know who Mika is. Whether they're pretending or actually don't remember her is up to interpretation. Later, wandering the town, she spots Yukari and Kazuya kissing under a streetlight and comments how they're just animals after all. Next, we see Chisato running around hectically. She runs up to Mika and tells her that she causes nothing but trouble for her and Yukari. Mika then suddenly finds herself in what looks to be a love hotel with a naked Sayaki, who was the leader of the group of bullies from the 6th rumor. He tells her she's useless and not to chicken out now and come to bed. Mika doesn't have any idea what's going on. The screen distorts again. Before the scene fully transitions, Sayaki talks about the fairy world and how it smells wonderful. Next, Mika finds herself in Hinashiro Grove with Sakura Himegami, the ghost girl who tried to lure Mika to the other side. Mika admits that she's tired of school, tired of pretending to be happy and energetic, tired of talking to other people, tired of being this version of Mika Kishi that she's built up. She tells Sakura that Chisato called her a nuisance. Sakura responds simply, "Kill Chisato." Mika at first questions her, but then repeats the word kill over and over. On her way home from school the next day, Mika runs into Chisato, who has blood all over her clothes. Mika asks what's going on, but Chisato says Mika doesn't have to worry about going home anymore because no one is there waiting for her. Chisato murdered her family. They made such strange noises and had weird, twisted faces as she did it. It was funny. Mika then gets a choice: to ignore Sakura's advice or kill Chisato. If you choose to ignore, Chisato will blow fairy dust at Mika, causing her to faint. Choosing to kill Chisato has Mika run at her with a knife. The choice doesn't really matter though. Either way, in the next scene, Mika will be on the riverbank again with the mysterious boy from earlier. Mika asks if it was he who caused all of these strange things to happen, but he denies responsibility and says he was merely watching. He says this was all for the purpose of protecting her, and that she shouldn't worry about these memories that don't actually exist. He assures her that Yukari and Chisato are still with her, for the time being, and he introduces himself as Ryo, which, I mean, his name is written right here the whole time. They couldn't have called him, like, Mysterious Boy or something to make this reveal a bit more impactful. In the next scene, Mika catches up with Yukari and Chisato as they walk home from school. Yukari is typically faux annoyed at Mika's arrival, and Mika excitedly tells the two about a rumor of a ghost that's been sighted at the local hospital. Mika ropes the others into an investigation and happily runs off. Yukari wonders aloud if Mika will always be so cheerful and energetic. As Mika runs, she stops to turn to the camera and pose. We then cut back to Yukari and Chisato, their clothes covered in blood, as the scene fades to black. Prank is the only scenario where Suda is credited as a writer, and it acts as a preview to the events of Moonlight Syndrome, so you can already see the shift in tone the next game is going to take. Darker, more introspective, and multi-layered. While the Twilight Syndrome games were tightly woven supernatural investigations focused on player choice and alternative endings, sprinkled with character development and drama for the three main protagonists, Moonlight Syndrome is a more linear and directed gameplay experience, but its story is sprawling, disturbing, and surreal. After the completion of Twilight Syndrome, the developers at Human were already busy planning its follow-up. This time around, though, Suda was given complete creative freedom. Tired of the urban legends and ghost stories that defined the original games, he opted for a switch to psychological horror, saying in an interview that humans and their capacity for evil were much scarier than any ghost or demon. Though the game goes for quite a large tonal shift, that doesn't mean that Suda completely rejected the themes and ideas that Twilight Syndrome had built itself on. Instead, Moonlight Syndrome takes that foundation and warps things in a different direction. Gameplay-wise, Moonlight Syndrome plays similarly to its spiritual predecessors. However, the heart rate monitor is gone, and there are no alternate endings. Wrong choices will mostly lead to a loop where you'll have to choose again. Rarely are there game overs. This makes the game a bit more of a trial and error experience than Twilight Syndrome. At least in those games you could still find your way to an ending, and then go back and make different choices to see a different outcome. The simplification of the choice system is a step back. I suppose it lets Moonlight Syndrome focus more on a singular narrative, but it makes the game less fun to actually play through. Also, this font, why? Ugh, I might as well just burn my eyes out. It's so hard to read at times. Obviously, the visuals overall are a difference here, too. Instead of finely animated 2D sprites, characters are rendered as 3D polygonal models. This gives Moonlight Syndrome its own look and feel, and I think the less detailed 3D characters were an intentional choice on Suda's part to try to disassociate the player a bit from these characters. But I still can't help missing the expressive 2D sprites from the Twilight Syndrome games. I also preferred the illustrative look of the backgrounds and other scenes to the 3D renders that we get in Moonlight Syndrome. The illustrations gave the game more personality. Again, this is most likely intentional based on the story's themes, but I can't help but find Twilight Syndrome's art direction more visually appealing. The music and sound design, though, are a huge step forward. Twilight Syndrome's soundscape was already impressive, but in Moonlight Syndrome, not only is there a greater variety of music to set different moods, the sound effects are used deliberately and effectively to create an immersive atmosphere of dread. One example, that we'll discuss in more detail later, of course, is the chapter where Mika visits a techno club and suffers from tinnitus the next day. The chapter is dominated by an ever-present static ringing, which develops into Mika hearing disembodied voices that end up being the thoughts of those around her.
変なのはおめえの頭の中だろ。
That's one very blatant example of how the game plays with sound, but there are other, more subtle uses woven throughout. Again, Moonlight Syndrome is best experienced with headphones. Moonlight Syndrome also features way more voice acting than Twilight Syndrome. Aside from the main characters that you control, who are not voiced, most other characters are voiced during conversations. Unfortunately, once again, there are no subtitles. But, again, the voice acting is really good, and helps to immerse you in the conversations.
変なの。間が持たないの？今の人たちってみんなそうよね。
Instead of being broken into semi-self-contained rumors, the story of Moonlight Syndrome is made up of chapters that all link together more cohesively. Though cohesive is probably one of the last adjectives I'd use to describe the actual plot of Moonlight Syndrome. The narrative this time around is more like a film, a bizarre Lynchian mindfuck of a film, but still, a film nonetheless. Before we jump into the actual synopsis, a few warnings. The story, as it's presented in the game, is technically incomplete. There were several chapters that were cut from the initial drafts of the script, and one chapter that was fully planned out for the final game but was cut from production due to time and budget constraints. And that chapter is crucial to understanding what the hell is actually going on in Moonlight Syndrome. So, for this next part of the video, I'm going to break down the story as it's told in the game, just so you can experience it the way it's presented. After that, we'll dive into the cut chapter and focus more on analyzing the game's events and themes. But be forewarned, even with all of that, Moonlight Syndrome's plot isn't going to make a whole lot of sense. It's just not that kind of game. One final warning before we get started, Moonlight Syndrome deals with some extremely sensitive topics, such as stalking, suicide, abuse, and other disturbing elements. So if you're sensitive to that kind of subject matter, consider dropping out of this one. Suda actually had to tone down and rewrite several scenes in Moonlight Syndrome due to real-life crimes and tragedies that occurred in Japan during its development. So with all of that out of the way, let's talk about Moonlight Syndrome. The game opens with a prologue chapter and a cutscene of the old school building being demolished. We'll find out later on that a new principal has taken over Hinashiro High School, and he's revamped the former public institution into something more akin to a preparatory school, building a fancy new north building and other additions such as a modern reception area and an observatory. Right off the bat, this introduces us to a central theme in Moonlight Syndrome, the battle between tradition and modernization. We're then reintroduced to Mika, who's walking home from a party she was invited to by her friend Kazuki. She complains about the social obligation of having to go to the party in the first place, saying she's tired of interacting with people. You and me both, sister. But her thoughts are interrupted when she hears another set of footsteps following behind her. Here you can either choose to turn toward the sound or ignore it. Ignoring it has no consequences and the game will continue normally. Turning around will put Mika face to face with a creepy guy who tries to get her to join a cult to avoid some vague disaster that he says is about to occur. She's then taunted by a child's laughter as she heads toward the entrance of her large apartment complex. Before heading inside, though, another voice calls out to her. She returns to the sidewalk and finds another mysterious man who seems to know who she is. At first, Mika is confused by this, but then realizes that this is Automata, the helpful paranormal writer who appeared only over telephone call in the Twilight Syndrome games. This is actually the first time Mika has met him in person, which explains why she doesn't recognize him at first. He says he's arrived because he feels a strange presence affecting the town and the people within it. He then reminds Mika of all the strange experiences she had throughout the first two Twilight Syndrome games. Again, Mika is a bit baffled by this, not really understanding that those events were all that strange to begin with. She finally agrees that, oh yeah, I guess hunting down rumors and encountering ghosts and stuff is a bit strange. Mika comments that she never really thought about it before, to which Automata replies that's probably because she lives here and she's just used to it. He even comments on the fact that she didn't think it was strange that a cultist was following her home, attempting to recruit her. Mika then gets angry that Automata witnessed that and didn't try to help her out. He makes a bunch of excuses saying he's just an outsider and it's not up to him to solve the town's mysteries, which just annoys Mika even more. He finally says that there is one way he can help her, and that's by allowing her to save the game. This fourth wall breaking here is doing a lot. First of all, it's recontextualizing the world of the Syndrome games, pointing out the strangeness inherent in the scenarios and commenting on how all the characters just kind of go with the flow. It's also poking fun at the fact that conversations with Automata in the original Twilight Syndrome were often long-winded and not particularly helpful in solving the central mysteries. Anyway, after saving the game, Mika grows tired of Automata's ramblings and decides to finally head home, to which Automata responds with a dad joke level parting phrase. Ara being an interjection like oh or ah, and mata being an informal goodbye, kind of like saying see ya or later, but it's also a pun on his name. Mika returns home and her mother tells her to go change for dinner, but she passes out on her bed and is only awoken later that night by her phone ringing. On the other end is a man who speaks to her rather gruffly, telling her to hurry up and meet him because he has something he wants to talk to her about. She's worried about the time, but ultimately agrees to go. After that, he comments on how he's worried about her. It all sounds a bit manipulative, and it becomes clear the two are dating. He says he'll be waiting for her at that park, then hangs up. Mika heads out to that park, and on the way passes another mysterious guy who looks similar to Ryo from the prank scenario at the end of Twilight Syndrome. And I'll just tell you right now, yeah, this is that same character. Mika comments on how weird he looks, and Ryo mistakes her for someone named Kyoko before they part ways. Mika meets up with her boyfriend, and there's a strange, almost telegram-like sound trilling in the background. Mika says she's sorry it took her so long to get here, but she's happy to see him. The man doesn't respond, and Mika wonders if he's not feeling well. The scene fades to black. The next morning at school, Mika and a few of her classmates are discussing rumors of an accident that occurred the night before on Reigetsu Pass. The girls comment that it was a big accident and someone named Kyoko died. She was a third-year student while the girls were first-years, meaning she's already graduated, as Mika is now a second-year student in this game. But Mika doesn't remember the girl, even though one of her classmates says that Mika looked just like Kyoko. There was even a rumor that the two of them could have been twins if they'd been the same age. For some reason, Mika doesn't remember any of this. The girls then giddily describe the gruesome details of the accident. Kyoko hit a truck head-on while riding her motorcycle. She hadn't been wearing a helmet, and the police had to basically scrape her remains off the road. Mika doesn't want to discuss the accident anymore, which surprises Miho, one of the other girls, who says Mika's always been interested in rumors. She then starts to taunt Mika, saying that hanging out with Yukari and Chisato must have made her soft. Mika and Miho end up in an argument, and Miho storms out of the room. Miki, another girl, goes after her, and Mika is left alone with Kazuki, the friend whom she was complaining about having to go out with the night before. And could we possibly get any more girls' names that start with M? Kazuki asks Mika if she knew that Kyoko, the girl who died, was dating the older brother of a girl named Rumi. Mika doesn't answer this, but Kazuki mentions that Mika looks pale. Though we won't learn this until the next chapter, Rumi's older brother is named Sumio, and is the guy that Mika went to meet the night before, which explains her stunned reaction hearing that he had also been dating the girl who died. After school, Kazuki suggests that Mika goes and hangs out with Yukari and Chisato to help cheer her up, but Mika says that the two of them are preparing for their third-year exams and she doesn't want to bother them. It seems that the three girls have grown distant since the end of Twilight Syndrome investigation. So instead, Kazuki invites Mika to go clubbing. Apparently someone committed suicide at the local club the night before, and they're having a special event because of it. Mika wonders if that isn't a bit disrespectful, and Kazuki says that maybe Miho had a point about Mika going soft. Wow. So anyway, Kazuki eventually gives up and Mika heads home. In the hallway of her apartment building, she greets her neighbor, but he ignores her. Rude. Then she realizes she's lost her apartment key. Luckily for her, this creepy white-haired child has found it for her. What a charming young man. At home, Mika eats dinner with her family. Her father shows a sudden interest in her school life, which it turns out is a result of hearing about one of his co-workers' daughters going missing. He also comments on the recession that was gripping the Japanese economy in the 90s. See my previous video about Racing Lagoon for more info on that. And basically, he talks about how culture and society are going down the shitter, and his generation needs to step up and do something about it. Spoiler, his generation didn't do anything about it, and neither did the following one. Mika's mother says this kind of conversation isn't appropriate for the dinner table, so Mika asks if they know who the white-haired boy she saw earlier was, as she's never seen him before in the building. Her parents both give really vague answers, saying something like, oh, you know, he's from the neighborhood.
Oh. You're from the neighborhood?
Yeah.
Your neighbor. But what's your name, neighbor?
Jeffrey. He's a good kid, Frank.
Shut the fuck up!
Before Mika can question them further, breaking news comes across the TV. An accident has occurred on Reigetsu Pass. The victim, Kyoko Kazan, aged 18, allegedly drove her motorcycle straight into an oncoming truck. No, you're not concussed. This is exactly the same accident that Mika and her classmates were discussing at school this morning, that they had said occurred the night before. Standing in the background of the news footage are two strange figures, one of whom appears to be the white-haired boy that found Mika's key earlier, and the other, Mika's cheating boyfriend, Sumio. And that's the end of the prologue. Hell of a way to start your psychological horror game. The first chapter of Moonlight Syndrome is titled Mode. All of the chapter titles have weird kanji combinations that don't make up any real or at least commonly used words. Though, if you take each kanji and put together the meanings, it sort of makes sense. For example, this first chapter uses the kanji for dream and the kanji for a topic or subject. As we'll see shortly, this chapter is framed as a retelling of a dream. Sort of. So there is some method to these titling conventions. After completing each chapter, a romanized title will appear, roughly showing how the kanji combinations are supposed to be pronounced. Anyway, this chapter opens with a title card that says it's Kyoko Kazan's last day. This time we control Ryo. He tells us that he had a dream. In that supposed dream, he had a conversation with his sister, Kyoko. There are several dialogue choices that can develop the conversation in slightly different ways, but the ultimate conclusion of their conversation is that Kyoko recognizes that Ryo has feelings for her, and that she doesn't believe that he's strong enough to protect her. So, she wants to protect him instead. We then find out that Ryo has been staring at himself in the mirror. He asks if these incestuous feelings for his sister are real, then calls himself a pervert in disgust. Next, Sumio barges in and starts berating Ryo for being weak-willed, saying that's the reason why he, Sumio, is a better match for Kyoko. Sumio also blames Ryo for his recent breakup with Kyoko, stating that Kyoko is too preoccupied looking after Ryo to focus properly on their relationship. Sumio tells him that despite everything, he's grown attached to Ryo and will be with him in spirit from now on. Okay. Ryo heads to the local club and runs into Rumi outside. This is Sumio's younger sister, whom Mika and Kazuki mentioned in the prologue during their conversation about Kyoko's death. Turns out Ryo and Rumi used to date, and the two brother-sister pairs used to double date. Though, dating each other's brother and sister, not brothers dating sisters. Although it turns out that seems like what both Ryo and Rumi wanted. Rumi also mentions a time when the four of them were happy, visiting a grassy field on a sunny day with a large tree and blue skies. She wishes they could all go back to that day, but Ryo chastises her for just trying to escape reality. Rumi gets fed up with him and leaves. Ryo enters the club, which is called Lost Highway, and yes, that is definitely a reference to the David Lynch film that came out the same year as Moonlight Syndrome. Interesting that Lost Highway also deals with substitution as one of its central themes. Anyway, when he finally enters the club, at the back of the room, he's approached by a young woman. You can choose to ignore her or engage in conversation. She introduces herself as Yayoi and tells Ryo that she'll be waiting for him upstairs. On the second floor, Ryo stops by the bar area and runs into an old classmate of his, Kimika Takahashi. When Ryo asks what she's doing here, she doesn't give him a straight answer, though Ryo notices that her hands are shaking. The other bar patrons talk about a range of topics, from musical genres to the current state of the Japanese economy. Riveting conversation for a club. The main room on the second floor has a jungle theme, and Yayoi is waiting for Ryo near the back. She says she wants to get to know him more and help him forget about his sister Kyoko. Before he can question her, she leads him to a private room. It's completely dark when he enters, but soon a light switch is flipped and he's face to face with Sumio, seated in a chair in the center of the room. What a cockblock, bro. I say that jokingly, but that's honestly the symbolism of this moment, since Sumio was dating Kyoko and technically in the way of Ryo being with his sister, and now he's here blocking Ryo from whatever he thought was going to happen with Yayoi. Sumio taunts Ryo and says Yayoi is actually with him, but Yayoi appears and tells Ryo not to believe Sumio. She then pleads for Ryo to save her. You get a choice of what to do here, but either way it will end with Ryo just getting insulted more. The two are in fact in league with one another. Yayoi then produces a paper bag with the words Violence Jack written on them, a reference to the Go Nagai manga of the same name. Suda is reportedly a huge Go Nagai fan. After a long conversation with Sumio, where he reiterates that Ryo is to blame for he and Kyoko being unable to have a normal relationship, Yayoi drops the bag on the floor, revealing Kyoko's severed head. She goes on to say that they're doing all of this for Ryo's own good. There's a hard transition to Sumio out in the club talking to a random girl. They're interrupted by Kimika, who says she's finally found Sumio. Sumio either doesn't really know her, or going by his playboy attitude, just doesn't remember this girl that he tossed away. The scene switches back to Ryo, who's now sitting in the chair that Sumio was in before. Yayoi stands over him and tells Ryo that she's already absorbed Kyoko and now she's going to do the same to Ryo. She looms over him and says he will take the place of Sumio for her and become her slave. You know, like a substitute. Back in the club, Kimika tells Sumio that she's gone through an abortion for him. She blames Sumio for making her do it, but Sumio still feigns ignorance, repeatedly asking her who she is. Kimika then sets herself on fire. As the other club-goers flee, Sumio just stands there and lets himself be engulfed by the flames, laughing all the while. Back to Ryo and Yayoi, she says the two of them will meet again. As she leaves the back room, she comes upon Sumio's corpse, whom she tells not to worry, because she will see things through to the end. We then travel through Yayoi's eye, which could be her absorbing Sumio, as she said she did to Kyoko, and will to Ryo. After this, Ryo finds himself in a large field, presumably a representation of the memory that Rumi spoke to him about before he entered the club. Sumio is there, along with Rumi and Kyoko. Sumio actually seems gentle in this scene, telling Ryo that this place is like paradise. Rumi tells Ryo to enjoy the beautiful weather, and Kyoko holds a dead cicada, lamenting its short lifespan and comparing it to the short time she had with Sumio. She tells Ryo not to worry, that she can take care of herself, and that he should smile. Nah, I don't think so. Back in the real world, if we can call it that, Ryo exits the club and finds Rumi. She doesn't seem fazed by her brother's death, and in fact tells Ryo that Sumio had been talking about it for a while now. Fair enough. Ryo returns to his apartment and hears the phone ringing. On the other end is Kyoko. She sounds distressed and knows about Sumio's death, but still says she's scared of him, like he can reach her from the other side. She tells Ryo to stay safe before hanging up. We then hear the sound of a car horn and the skid of tires, and see a shot of a motorcycle crashed into the side of a truck. There's then a shot of the full moon and that weird Suda-sounding voice that was used extensively in Killer 7. The voice says, "Metaphor." Yeah, that clears things up. So at this early point in the story, we've heard about or seen Kyoko's death 3 times. Suda himself sheds some light on the wonky timeline here in an interview about some of the deeper themes and more confusing aspects of Moonlight Syndrome's storyline. According to him, due to the influence of outside forces, which we'll look at as we continue our story analysis, time in the town of Hinashiro is warped and distorted. Certain events occur at different points in time for different characters, depending on their emotional connection to those events. In Suda's own words, the gravity of acknowledging a person's death is represented by the feeling of the length of time. For Mika's classmates, Kyoko's death isn't something that affects their daily lives. They have the weakest and fastest recognition of it, and it's explained in conversation format in the game's prologue. Next, Mika learns more information from the news than she heard from her classmates' conversation, and in Maude, Sumio first acknowledges it when he initially sees Kyoko's head, and then in the final scene of Maude, Ryo acknowledges it. Since Ryo had the deepest connection to Kyoko, it takes him the longest time of all to become aware of her death. The death of someone close to you. I tried showing the gap that everyone has felt, or will feel, towards death using a staggering of time. The second chapter, Sogyu, opens at Mika's apartment complex before school. The building has quite an odd shape, built into the side of a hill on the outskirts of town. We'll find out later that many of the residents in town call it the Pyramid, derisively. At school, Mika meets up with Kazuki, who's heard a rumor about the chemistry teacher. You can choose to pursue this or ignore it. Mika asks if Kazuki is free after school, but she says she's got club activities and suggests that Mika visit Chisato and Yukari. We also meet Arisa, a first-year student. We'll see more of her as the game goes on. She reminds Mika that they're meant to meet up to go shopping the next morning, then runs off. Upstairs on the third year's floor, Mika finds Chisato, who says she and Yukari have a special study session after school, but Yukari is nowhere to be found. She's actually lounging on the school roof, ditching the study session. If you got more info about the chemistry teacher, you can rope Yukari into an extra investigation into this rumor, which plays out similar to the scenarios in the Twilight Syndrome games. The investigation ends when they realize that the reason the chemistry teacher has been acting so weird is because he's got bowel issues. Yukari gets annoyed and leaves. You can actually skip this whole little adventure if you don't ask for more details from Kazuki. If that's the case, Mika will just lie down on the roof with Yukari. Either way, as Mika attempts to leave school, she gets caught by a member of the lacrosse club. If you remember from the Twilight Syndrome section of the video, Mika belonged to the badminton and lacrosse clubs. Apparently, she's given up badminton and isn't a huge fan of lacrosse either, it seems, as she tries to get out of going to practice, but the other club member drags her along. After practice, as the girls change and get ready to go home, Mika enters a daze and finds herself in an empty black and white version of the locker room. The white-haired boy from earlier, who found Mika's missing apartment key, appears. She doesn't seem to remember him though, acting as if this is her first time seeing him. He makes a bunch of cryptic statements about the uselessness of human beings and how things around Mika have already been set in motion, but that she shouldn't be scared because he will save her soul. Then he disappears, and Mika returns to the normal locker room and gets accused of zoning out while the other club member was talking to her. We see another shot of the moon, this time in its waning gibbous phase, and the voice says, "Go sit." The third chapter, Henshitsu, actually begins as a remake of the bonus prank scenario from Twilight Syndrome. There are a few scenes that are cut or altered, but it mostly plays out the same. It turns out this was a dream, as Mika is woken up by a phone call from Arisa, the first-year student we briefly bumped into during the last chapter. Turns out Mika is late for their morning shopping excursion. On the way to the shopping district, Mika has several strange encounters with other people in town. First is a man and his dog named Violator, a Spawn reference. Not the only Spawn reference we'll see in this game either, by the way. Mika notices that the dog seems scared of its owner. Next, she runs into a homeless man who expresses an interest in killing Mika, then a fat otaku, her words, not mine, who tries to hit on her, but she diffuses the situation by kicking him in the family jewels. Last, there's an older woman who talks about having lost her baby.
私のベビーどこ行ったの返してちょうだいかわいいベビー
Maybe the dingo ate her baby. There are several dialogue choices here in order to make it through the streets unscathed. Again, lots of trial and error. We also see Ryo walking through the same street and seeing the same people that Mika interacted with. Continuing on, Mika is followed by someone, who, based on their outfit, is the dog owner from earlier. Ryo also runs into a dead dog on the street. If you choose correctly, Mika will end up getting away from her stalker and arriving at the shopping district. She meets Arisa, but apparently they were also supposed to meet Rumi, who isn't around. There's a lot of running around the shopping street, losing Arisa, finding Rumi, losing Arisa again. Mika eventually runs into Yayoi, the girl whom Ryo met in the club the night before. She mentions that her last name is Itsushima, a name that Mika immediately recognizes since it's Chisato's last name. Yayoi confirms that she is in fact Chisato's younger sister. Mika is in disbelief since Chisato never mentioned her before, but Yayoi says that's normal since the two of them don't live together and don't get along very well. Yayoi tells Mika that she was sent by Arisa, who needs help carrying a bunch of shopping bags. Mika follows Yayoi to a place outside of the shopping district and loses her. She then runs into the dog-killing stalker from before. Back in the shopping district, Ryo arrives and is confronted by Yayoi. He asks where Mika is. We'll find out how he knows who Mika is later. He wants to protect her, and Yayoi says she can lead him to her, but she actually ends up taking him to a club where he finds Yayoi laying on a couch with her head in the lap of the strange white-haired boy. With Mika in trouble, stuck in the grip of her stalker, Yukari and Chisato arrive out of nowhere, just in time, before the stalker could do anything to her, and they have this cheesy reunion on top of it. It almost feels like this is the way Mika desires her friendship with Yukari and Chisato to be, as they're clearly growing apart in this game compared to their close camaraderie in Twilight Syndrome. In any case, the stalker is arrested, but as he sits in the back of the police car, he starts bleeding from the mouth, implying that he bit off his own tongue. We see the moon, almost in a last quarter phase, and the voice says, "Nightmare." The next chapter, Hendin, opens at school. Miho, the girl who was so antagonistic towards Mika while they discussed Kyoko's accident, excitedly runs into the classroom to tell Mika and Kazuki about her suspension from school. Apparently she beat up a teacher. While this is going on, Mika catches a glimpse of the white-haired boy running by out in the hallway. She gives chase and ends up in a loop between the different floors of the school, similar to what happened to the girls in one of the rumors in Twilight Syndrome. Somehow, even though she never leaves the school, Mika ends up in Hinashiro Grove, the place where she met Sakura Himegami. Mika sees her friends chatting together, but they don't seem to hear Mika calling out to them. They recede further and further into the forest despite Mika telling them that they shouldn't go that way. Interestingly, when Mika speaks in this scene, her dialogue is written entirely in katakana. Sentences written in either hiragana or katakana without the use of kanji are usually included in materials meant for children, since they don't yet know all of the kanji readings. So here the intention seems to be that Mika has reverted to a childlike state, calling out to her friends that maybe she views as more mature than herself. Then we cut to a vision of the girls' dead bodies with Mika standing over them, holding a knife. Mika awakens in her classroom as if nothing happened. On her way home, an ambulance passes by ominously. We'll learn where this ambulance is headed in the next chapter. As per usual, the moon appears, this time a waning crescent, and the voice says, "Live." Fuyo begins with a boy standing on the edge of the roof of an apartment building. Other kids watch on from the roof of another building nearby. Seemingly urged on by an image of many eyes, the boy jumps. On the other building, the rooftop is empty. The next morning, Mika tells Yukari about the incident and informs her that this is actually the third roof jumping event involving junior high schoolers at this particular apartment complex. Yukari is disgusted by Mika's almost gleeful interest in such a tragic event. This is also where we learn that Mika's own strangely shaped apartment building is referred to as the Pyramid. It's also quite an upscale place to live compared to the government housing complexes where the suicides are happening. Mika's old self is shining through here and she wants to go investigate these strange occurrences. Yukari finally agrees to go, then Chisato and Arisa arrive on the scene. Arisa is also in the archery club with Chisato. Being a first-year student and a new member of the club, she holds Chisato in high regard, and there's a bit of tension between Mika and Arisa. Yukari is also annoyed by Arisa's straightforward attitude. This is their first meeting, but Arisa is already taking a familiar stance and referring to Yukari by her first name. Oh dear. If you've watched any romance anime, you'll know this is kind of a big deal, and it's the same for friendships as well. Being on a first-name basis with someone denotes a particularly close relationship, especially as you get older. Mika scolds Arisa for her forwardness, and Chisato comments that Mika is acting like Yukari did when Yukari first met Mika. Yukari doesn't take kindly to being compared to Mika and ends up leaving. Chisato then asks what Mika and Yukari were talking about, and it seems like the old gang is getting back together for another adventure. Plus one new addition. Before they all head off to investigate the apartments though, Mika has left her phone, or PHS as they refer to it in-game, somewhere in the school. PHS stands for Personal Handy Phone System, basically a cell phone, but the network was only used in Asia. If you played the original Final Fantasy VII, you'll remember that Barrett gives Cloud a PHS in order to contact the team to switch in and out party members. It's a 90s thing. Anyway, Mika believes she left her phone in the library, because she ate lunch there. On the way to the library, they run into the new principal of the school. He's a kind-looking older gentleman who seems to know and care a lot about his students. When questioned on that fact, he says the girl's homeroom teacher has been telling him a lot of good things about them. What a kind old man. In the library, searching the tables where Mika ate lunch reveals no phone, but Arisa ends up finding it among the bookshelves on the opposite side of the room. Mika wonders how it got over there, and Arisa makes a comment about how Mika's generation is too obsessed with toys and other devices. She says that her own peers are more interested in using their time wisely. You're a year younger than her. We fast forward a bit. Mika is on her way to the apartments. Eyes hang ominously in the reddening sky. An extremely unsettling image. One that also reinforces the whole onlooker theme that's going on in this chapter, and in several other places throughout the game. At the place they agreed to meet, Arisa, Chisato, and Yukari are nowhere to be found. Mika notices a kid enter one of the buildings and decides to follow, but is blocked by a trio of other kids, 2 boys and a girl. All 3 of them are junior high school students, and they all taunt Mika, and one of the boys even asks if Mika wants to get it on with him. This is all bark and no bite though, as it's revealed that the 2 boys are actually terrified of the girl with them, whose name is Riru. Arisa finally arrives and runs into the kid who Mika saw entering the building earlier. Her name is Nana, and she's upset over the boy who jumped to his death the night before, but not because she was friends with him. She actually hated him. She's upset because Riru told her that she'll be the next to jump. Arisa tells the girl to wait in her apartment and lock the door while she goes to get help. The girl obliges, and Arisa meets up with Mika. They fill each other in on what the other has witnessed since arriving here. Then they decide on the best way forward. While this is going on, we cut to a scene where Arisa appears at Nana's door and convinces her to open up. We then hear Nana scream. Mika and Arisa run into Takeru, who was part of the trio of kids from earlier, not the horn dog, but the other one. When they mention Nana is in trouble, Takeru says she was taken by Riru to be sacrificed. Strangely, even though he seemed to be friends with Riru, he's unsure of where she lives. So Arisa and Mika split up to search the 2 apartment buildings. Mika checks what lights are on in building A, and then you have to go through the building and investigate each of the apartment numbers that she mentions. Before that, though, Chisato and Yukari arrive at the apartments and run into Yayoi, who introduces herself as Chisato's sister. This throws off Yukari much the same way it did Mika when she first encountered Yayoi in the shopping district. Seems like nobody knew about Chisato's younger sister. Chisato wants to know what Yayoi is doing here, and she responds that she's with him. It's not explicit at this point, but especially considering the scene in the shopping district when Yayoi led Ryo to a club where she laid with her head in his lap, the him Yayoi is referring to is the white-haired boy. Chisato blames Yayoi for the events happening here, but Yayoi says she has nothing to do with it. She's merely watching. Chisato asks where he is now, and Yayoi explains that he's also just watching things unfold. Yayoi then begins insulting Yukari, which angers Chisato, and she and her younger sister end up going Super Saiyan. Yukari gets caught in the middle of their chi measuring contest and is teleported to the roof of one of the apartment buildings. We rejoin Mika inside building A. Aramata's here too, just hanging out, acting as a save point. Mika offers no commentary on the fact that he's here either. She goes through the building, checking the apartment numbers she made note of earlier. Each one reveals a junior high school-aged kid, only seen through the darkness as a single eye, calling back to the eyes in the sky above the apartment buildings. They all tell her they don't know where Riru lives, or tell her to check rooms that she didn't make note of earlier. On the 10th floor, Mika is told by one of the kids that the others were all lying to her, and this voice sounds very familiar.
ここの子たちみんな嘘つきだから。
This is not a coincidence, as we'll come to find out. From the clue she's given by this girl, Mika figures out that Riru's apartment is number 101, so she's been just running up and down these stairs for nothing the whole time. When Mika arrives at apartment 101, Riru is impressed that Mika managed to figure out where she lives and invites her inside. We then cut to Arisa, who comments that Mika and Nana are both in danger, and we see a disturbing image of several kids jumping from the top of the apartment building. Next, it's revealed that Nana is standing on the edge of the roof with Yukari. Nana says she has to jump because everyone is watching her. Yukari tries to talk her down and is almost successful, but as Nana backs away, the eyes reappear and Nana approaches the ledge again. She yells at the sky and tells Riru to watch her as she dives. And so she does. We then cut back to Mika and Riru inside the apartment. Riru explains that she's only a symbol, a pulse. This pulse represents the feelings of the people who live inside the apartment building. She says the families who live here are made up of parents who both need to work to make ends meet, so they're out all day and long into the evening. The younger children are all brainwashed by TV and video games. The older high schoolers are busy with friends and club activities, so the junior high schoolers are left alone, constructing their own individual worlds, separated from each other in their dark, lonely apartments. Riru blames society and the structure of the apartment building itself, both in the literal sense and the metaphorical one, for things ending up this way. Basically, an apartment complex is no place to raise a family of well-adjusted human beings, and it's a life that's been forced on these people by the modern world. There's also a subtext of blaming the current state of Japanese society on the westernization of Japan, a clashing of ideologies that Japan's more traditional cultural structure could not reconcile. This theme was lightly touched upon in the Twilight Syndrome rumor that involved the network of World War II-era tunnels running underneath the town, and is actually a theme that will come up repeatedly throughout Suda's work. It's also a topic of interest for many Japanese writers, artists, and filmmakers in the latter half of the 20th century. Mika asks if there's any way to put an end to the things going on here, to save these kids' lives. Riru urges Mika to tell the world about how the junior high schoolers here live, alone and cut off from everything around them. Riru also says there is one other thing that only she can do, but she won't tell Mika what that is, because it's none of her business. She then asks if Mika would like some tea, while Riru prepares for whatever she's about to do. You get a choice of whether to drink or not, but either way it ends with Mika being knocked out. We then rejoin Yukari as she runs into Takeru, who has somehow managed to catch Nana from falling. He tells Yukari that he was only able to do it thanks to Mika's help, referring to the conversation he had with Arisa and Mika when they all resolved to find and save Nana. Yukari wonders if Mika has matured somewhat. On the ground, Arisa runs into Chisato. Apparently, she drove off Yayoi for now. Arisa fills Chisato in on what she and Mika have been up to, and Chisato says she'll go look for Mika while Arisa goes to find Yukari. The two part, and we cut to Mika passed out inside Riru's apartment. Riru thanks Mika for helping her to realize that as just a pulse, she's powerless to do anything, but by becoming something of substance, she can enact some sort of change, whatever that means. Yukari is then confronted by the dark presence that enshrouds the apartment complex, represented by the eyes in the sky. She hears the voices of the junior high schoolers, crying, asking why, lost and confused. Here, Arisa reveals her own Super Saiyan abilities, she is a student of Chisato after all, and expels the presence from the building. Chisato is then shown on the roof with Riru, who is standing on the edge about to jump. Now it's Chisato's turn to try to talk a kid down, but Riru says she's resolved to do it because it will put an end to this vicious cycle. Chisato is convinced that Riru's death won't change anything though, because the kids and the other people who live in the building are too caught up with their own lives to recognize the symbolism behind her death. Still, Riru says it's the only thing she can do. Chisato brings up the Twilight Syndrome rumor about the boy who committed suicide in the school gym. She says that the boy's choice didn't change anything either. Even in death, he found no release from his pain. Riru is still determined to jump, so Chisato then pulls her trump card and summons Hanako, who tells Riru about the cold loneliness of death. Another side point here, it's explained in Suda's interview about Moonlight Syndrome that Hanako is actually an avatar of Chisato, who, as we've seen throughout this chapter, is quite a powerful spiritual medium. This Hanako connection may not have been the case in Twilight Syndrome initially, but Hanako does act as a guiding presence to help Yukari find her way out of the other side in the final chapter of that game. She's also the one who reveals to Mika that the other kids in the building were lying to her. Suda says that Hanako is Chisato, but it could also be interpreted that she's a messenger spirit in Chisato's service. This could be another explanation for how the girls were able to escape from Hanako in the prologue of Twilight Syndrome. Possibly that was the moment when Chisato used her powers to bring Hanako under her control. Who knows? It's an interesting theory though. In any case, Hanako's appearance and Chisato's ability to summon spirits makes Riru believe that Chisato is an angel who is guiding her to heaven. Chisato protests and says she's just a human and is only trying to stop her from jumping. Riru is happy that someone finally cares about her, but she jumps anyway. Yukari and Arisa see that an ambulance is parked out front for Nana. A man walks up. He has a briefcase in his hand, and Riru falls right on him. This saves Riru, but up on the roof, Yayoi appears and tells Chisato that the man who Riru just fell on was Riru's father. A cruel twist of fate. We'll look more closely at Riru and this whole scenario near the end of the video. Chisato once again blames Yayoi for these events, but Yayoi tells her that they can't force anyone to do anything. She once again says that she was only watching things unfold, but when Chisato questions her about what happened with Yukari, teleporting her to the roof and everything, Yayoi just shrugs it off and says, well, she got bored of just watching. Chisato vows to put a stop to Yayoi's meddling, but her little sister doesn't seem too concerned about the threat. Yayoi says that Chisato is too attached to tradition to be a threat to her, further reinforcing these ideas of traditionalism versus modernization that have been weaving their way through the story. Yayoi mentions the mysterious he again and says that his power is stronger than either hers or her sister's. We then see an image of some younger, supposedly elementary school-aged kids rotting their brains away in front of a PlayStation, as the white-haired boy looks on. Creepy little bastard. The final shot is the faintest sliver of the moon, and the voice says, "Be spirited away." Denpao, the next chapter, begins with Mika calling up Yukari to invite her to a techno event at Lost Highway. Perhaps due to Mika's handling of events in the previous chapter, Yukari seems to have grown closer to her, admiring her maturity. So despite initially being apprehensive about going to a club, because she doesn't really enjoy techno music or dancing, she relents and decides to join Mika. The two end up having a good time at the club, and nothing weird ends up happening. Mika does fall asleep near the dance floor at one point as Yukari heads up to the bar for some drinks, but nothing ends up coming of that, and the two decide to head home, with Yukari even commenting that she had a great time. On her walk back home, though, Mika realizes that she has a ringing in her ears and is worried that she's developed tinnitus. This is the chapter that I mentioned when I was talking about the sound design in Moonlight Syndrome. A droning static persists throughout most of the duration of this chapter. At school the next day, Mika mentions the tinnitus to Yukari. Yukari says she hasn't noticed any ringing in her own ears. This is when we discover that when speaking to other characters in this chapter, their spoken dialogue appears as text, while their inner thoughts are voiced.
あんな音楽聴いてるからだよ。バカ。
Yukari says she's worried about Mika's condition, but thinks that it's Mika's fault for falling asleep while on the dance floor. At first, Mika doesn't understand what's happening and argues with Yukari for the things she didn't say, which just ends up confusing Yukari. Throughout the school day, you'll have the opportunity to wander the school and catch the thoughts of various people in between classes.
変なのはおめえの頭の中だろ。
Things get stranger as the day continues. At one point, Mika's tinnitus is replaced by the music from the club the night before. She assumes someone is playing it from a CD nearby. In between one of the classes, Miho tells Mika that she saw Chisato selling a book of poetry near Shimokita Station. If Mika confronts Chisato about this, she tells Mika that she was ordered to do it by her kitchen sink. It's Chisato's mission to tell everyone that satellite waves are brainwashing people, and she was told this by aliens from the planet Unmo that she went swimming with one time. Then she says the aliens and a panda are calling her, so she runs off. I swear I know how to read Japanese. During the next class, Mika falls asleep and wakes up back at Lost Highway, as if everything that happened after her awakening here in the beginning of the chapter was just a dream. She remembers that Yukari went off to get drinks, but when she gets to the bar, she finds Miho there instead, wearing her school uniform no less. The end of the night plays out the same way, and Mika doesn't comment on the fact that Miho was wearing her school uniform until the two part. Mika suffers the effects of tinnitus again and goes through the exact same motions she did after separating from Yukari earlier in the chapter. Mika awakens in the middle of class, as if everything that she just experienced was a dream. She realizes that she has a pounding headache and decides to go to the nurse's office. On her way, she hears a voice say that it will kill her, and she begins running. She runs into the nurse and speaks a bunch of nonsense. It's really nonsense, too. She says something about a three-legged man, and then some random English letters, and finally she says she doesn't understand why her right is the nurse's left. Then she passes out. In the darkness, we hear the sound of a car crash. This will become significant later. The tinnitus finally stops and Mika wakes up in a silent and empty Lost Highway. In the bar area, Mika runs into the white-haired boy. Once again, she doesn't remember him from their previous meetings. He admits that he's the one causing these things to happen to Mika, and he tells her there's more where this came from. But every time they meet, she won't remember him. Mika attempts to strike him, but he freezes her in place, makes his hand into a pistol, and shoots her.
分かってないね。
Mika wakes up in her bedroom and realizes that it's Friday morning. Apparently, this is the morning when the chapter began. When she gets to school, Miho shows her a flyer for the techno event that she and Yukari, or perhaps she and Miho, end up attending together. A waxing crescent moon appears, and the voice says, "Noise." The next chapter, Kaibyo, opens at Hinashirodai Station, as Mika waits for Arisa to arrive. The two of them are meant to be going somewhere together. This is where I noticed that the town of Hinashiro has reverted back to its original kanji in Moonlight Syndrome, recalling its darker past involving ritualistic sacrifice. I don't know if this different kanji is apparent earlier in the game, but this is the first chapter where I made note of it. Since substitution plays such an important role in the story, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say this is significant. A train arrives, headed for Shimokita, but a station announcement informs that there's been an accident and the train will be delayed. With the view of the platform obscured by the train, Arisa arrives and apologizes for being late. She says they better hurry and get on the train before it leaves. Mika begins to tell Arisa about the accident, but she's cut off by another announcement saying that the train will be departing momentarily. The two hurry aboard and the train leaves the station, but it doesn't seem like anyone else who was waiting got on, and the sign above the platform is a jumbled mess. On the train, Arisa and Mika can discuss several topics, such as the fact that it takes Arisa 2 hours to comb her hair, or their interest in TV and video games. One of the more serious topics includes Mika's personality, with Arisa encouraging Mika to think for herself more often and become a responsible adult. Again, much like in their conversation in front of the school in the beginning of the previous chapter, and in the conversation between Mika and Arisa about Mika's generation's obsession with phones, Arisa positions herself as some kind of sagely character outside of the current generation, even though she's a year younger than Mika, which obviously annoys Mika. You can't see all of the conversations on a single playthrough, unfortunately. You can only choose one to talk about. After that, Arisa will begin to tell Mika about a recurring dream she's been having. This is such a ridiculously complicated and mind-boggling conversation that I've decided to describe it in full. So get your head on straight, because here we go. In Arisa's dream, a kaiju invasion grips Japan. Godzilla attacks Tokyo, Mothra attacks Yokohama, Gaios attacks Fukuoka, and Legion attacks Sapporo. All of this calls for a hero, and the only hero for the job is Ultraman Tiga. Ultraman Tiga was the 12th installment in the long-running Ultraman TV series that aired between 1996 and 1997, so during the time that Twilight Syndrome was being developed. It was kind of a big deal at the time because there hadn't been a new Ultraman series since the early 80s, so it was quite the sensation. In the Ultraman Tiga series, Ultraman has 3 different combat modes, which are reflected in Arisa's dream here. So Ultraman splits into his 3 forms and heads off to Yokohama, Fukuoka, and Sapporo. Mika tries to interrupt here, but Arisa says to listen to her because this dream has philosophical underpinnings. Sure. So anyway, the 3 forms of Ultraman Tiga head off to the different cities, but who will prevent Godzilla from destroying Tokyo? That task is left up to Ultraman Tiga's human alter ego, Daigo. However, because he's just an ordinary human without his Ultraman transformation, Daigo has no chance of defeating Godzilla, even with Guts there to back him up. I don't actually know for sure, but I'm guessing this is Guts from Berserk. It's the only Guts I can think of. If anyone has any other insights, leave a comment. Things are dire in Tokyo, and it's about to get worse. Dark clouds begin to swirl in the sky. Godzilla's surprised. Daigo's surprised. Everyone's surprised. A dark silhouette appears behind the clouds, and from those clouds, Gamera appears. A loud rumbling sounds, and Gamera's shell opens and fires a Genki Dama. Now, I don't know much about kaiju lore, but I do know a thing or two about Dragon Ball, and I'm pretty sure this is the spirit bomb from that series. So, Gamera's Genki Dama destroys the Earth, passing all the way through to Brazil, Arisa says. The Americans, the English, the French, the Chinese, they're all obliterated. All the heroes in the world die. Superman, Batman, even Spawn. Told you there was another Spawn reference. Even Savage Dragon is killed. Anyone who knows Savage Dragon, man, good on you, because I didn't even get that one. Arisa then reveals that all of this kaiju tokusatsu superhero nonsense was happening inside a diorama that a child named Daigo was building while playing with action figures in a sandbox. When his toys were broken, the world was destroyed. But it turns out that Daigo himself is actually kept encaged in the zoo of Sodom, where aliens called the Chameleons live. I have no idea if this part is a reference to anything. Maybe that one episode of Twilight Zone where the dude is kept in an alien zoo. Or Slaughterhouse 5. Anyway, this zoo apparently floats on water and is constantly moving downriver. Eventually, the river ends in a waterfall that flows out into space, and Doraemon comes along and swallows the zoo. I swear to you, I can read Japanese. Doraemon was actually avenging the death of his friend Nobita, who had been killed in a vacant lot by a local junior high school student also named Daigo. It's unclear if this is the Daigo we've been following, or if it was a different kid named Daigo and Doraemon was just mistaken. Either way, Daigo is then targeted by a soul beam fired by the Dessler cannon, a reference to space battleship Yamato, and turned into ash. At this point, Mika has really grown tired of this whole thing and asks when this dream is going to end. Arisa says she's been having this dream for a long time, but it never had an ending until the other day, which is why she's telling Mika about it now. Lucky her. Mika then tells Arisa to just skip to the end. Arisa's reluctant at first, but she finally agrees and says a bunch of other stuff happens, and in the end, Daigo eats the whole world. Afterwards, Daigo goes to sleep and dreams of becoming Ultraman Tiga. Again, Gamera appears, and yada yada yada. Arisa's dream repeats itself. Mika says that's a pretty boring conclusion, that it all ends up being a dream in the end, but Arisa says that's not the point. This is Arisa's dream world after all. It seems like everything is set right and just repeated at the end, but there's one contradiction here. Really, Arisa, just one? That whole thing was a mess, which is pretty much what Mika says. Arisa goes on to explain that Daigo himself is the contradiction. When Ultraman Tiga appears, Daigo is nowhere to be found. Mika points out that Arisa is not making any sense, to which Arisa responds that you needed to be there, and she wishes she could show Mika all of the little mechanisms that make this dream world work. That way she'd be able to understand why Daigo is such a contradiction. And yeah, I don't know if we're really meant to understand the contradiction of Daigo in the way that Arisa wants us to either. But perhaps she means that if Daigo becomes Ultraman Tiga, then how is he able to continue to exist as Daigo, since they're alter egos? It's like Bruce Wayne and Batman existing as separate characters at the same time. In any case, somehow all of this leads Arisa to a comparison with the modern world. Her conclusion is that God doesn't play a part in destiny. They're just people steeped in contradictions, harming each other and harming the world, but the world wouldn't exist without people. And that's the end. The dream is an intentionally obtuse mess, but Arisa's ultimate point does have bearing on the narrative of Moonlight Syndrome, which again could be a meta-commentary for its plot being intentionally contradictory and confusing, but at the same time shedding light on real societal issues. After all of that, Mika asks Arisa what she feels like doing today, to which Arisa responds that Mika is the one who invited her out in the first place, so she thought she had a plan. The two then realize they have no idea who invited who out to begin with, or where they're headed. Arisa then falls asleep, which annoys Mika at first, but she ends up nodding off too, just as the white-haired boy appears. Again, Mika doesn't remember who he is and treats him just like any other kid. When he mentions that he's been watching her and knows all about the difficult situations she's been going through, she changes her tune. Her attempts to wake Arisa are useless, and finally the boy offers her a gift, the power to read people's inner thoughts. This intrigues Mika, so she accepts. Mika then travels through the train, listening in on the thoughts of several passengers. First is a businessman who's stressed about his meaningless job and how it makes him feel like a stranger to his wife and children. He also has sexual fantasies about one of his female coworkers. Then there's a couple who act all lovey-dovey on the outside, but secretly can't stand each other and are using the other for their own personal reasons. An old woman who feels abandoned by her children, a guy who's angry at the world and has murderous thoughts, a trio of female friends who can't stand each other, two women whose opinions on art and literature are pretentious. One thing that all of these people have in common, besides their antisocial inner workings, are that even if they're in pairs or groups, each of them are trapped within their own mind and perspective, naturally. However, when Mika runs into a group of elementary school kids, she finds that the kids seem to be communicating with each other almost telepathically. This could just be a reflection of their innocence, or it could be a glimmer of hope for the future, that the younger generation will learn to communicate and hopefully understand each other better, have more empathy and compassion. The last person Mika meets on the train is Ryo, whom she doesn't recognize. If you remember, she did pass him briefly in the prologue, and she encountered him in her dream, the recreation of the prank scenario from Twilight Syndrome. When she tries to read his thoughts, there's nothing but silence. At the end of the train, she encounters the white-haired boy's voice and a bright white light. He explains that he gave Mika the power to read others' thoughts so that she'd understand that people aren't worth the effort. Humanity is a waste. Mika is convinced that it must be a coincidence that all of these people aboard the train have such shallow and selfish thoughts, but the boy says that it's just human nature. Back on the train, Ryo wakes up and sees the boy sitting next to a still sleeping Mika across from him. Ryo asks why the boy is trying to bring Mika and Ryo together. The boy tells him that the promise has changed and that Mika is a substitute. Ryo says he doesn't care about Mika and that the boy should just leave him alone. But the boy knows that isn't true because Mika looks just like his sister Kyoko. He also informs Ryo that this is all part of the contract that was made. Ryo is supposed to protect Mika. We really have no idea what they're talking about here, and if you only play the game, you'll never know. But we'll get around to unpacking this when we talk about the cut chapter. Ryo only reiterates that he can't do anything to protect Mika, and he wonders why this boy keeps bothering the two of them so much. The boy says it's all a coincidence. He felt like getting into some mischief, and he happened to run into Ryo and Mika. He then says he'll show Ryo what's really inside Mika's heart, which results in a bunch of confused images and voice snippets. The boy says that all Mika seems to think about is Sumio, so there's no room for Ryo. He asks if it's better if he takes Mika with him into the darkness. It's calling for her too, after all. We then see Ryo on the train with his eyes rolled back in his head. questioning why Mika was involved with Sumio and what any of this has to do with Kyoko. Across from him, the boy and Mika are gone. We hear Mika's disembodied voice in the darkness, wondering where she is. There are flashes of images. Again, much like the sounds we heard when the boy showed us inside of Mika's heart, they don't make much sense. Mika thinks she sees herself and an urbanized image of Hinashiro. She comments that everywhere looks this way nowadays. The boy then presents her with the bright light again, and she gets a choice of whether or not to step into it. Mika can attempt to resist, but eventually she will enter the light. Ryo, from somewhere, tries to stop her, telling her the boy is a demon. Despite her initial resistance, Mika seems to have fallen under his spell and claims that he's a god. Ryo questions why he even needs to save Mika. He doesn't even know her. He asks his sister Kyoko what he should do. Should he try to protect Mika? Going back to Ryo's conversation with Sumio and Yayoi from the beginning of the game, Ryo is still a weak boy who relies on his sister for protection. Ultimately, though, he seems to take a step forward and decides that there might be a way he can help her. We cut back to the white-haired boy back on the train with a sleeping Arisa. He speaks to her about how he wasted so much time trying to get Ryo and Mika together and ultimately failed, but he supposes that the two of them will be happy where they ended up. Every time he speaks to Arisa, she just snores in response, but he acts as if she's asking him questions, like who he really is. But he answers that it doesn't matter. Humans can't comprehend what he is, so they don't need to know. He says he'll reveal his true self soon, but Arisa may not be around for that. In the end, though, he tells her not to worry, because she's not as foolish as those around her. Arisa wakes up and finds herself back at Hinashirodai Station, where this whole chapter started. She also notices that Mika is missing. She finds Mika's keychain on the ground as a station announcement comes over the loudspeaker, thanking everyone for their patience for the last hour and 40 minutes as the train was stopped. Finally, we see a first quarter moon, and the voice says, "Mind, heart, spirit." The penultimate chapter of the game is Dowaku. As it begins, we see another demolition, this time of the old gym on the school grounds. Inside the gym, however, is a female student who's crushed by falling rubble. Later at school, Arisa informs Yukari that Mika is missing. Yukari attempts to call Mika, but gets an automated message that the person she's trying to reach is unavailable. She tries calling Mika's home number afterwards, but the answering machine message recorded by Mika's mother says that they've gone on a trip overseas. Arisa wonders if Mika went with them, but Yukari says if she were going on a trip like that, she never would have shut up about it. Chisato hasn't seen Mika recently either, so the girls decide to ask around the school, with their first lead being Mika's friend, Kazuki. After finding her near the entrance of the school and explaining the situation, Kazuki also becomes concerned and decides to help look for her. Arisa goes to check out Mika's home while Yukari and Kazuki search the school. This leads to them finding a knife in Mika's locker in the lacrosse club changing room. They also hear a rumor about a girl dying in a construction accident in the gym. Apparently, the school is trying to keep this info from the students, but we all know how rumors spread around this place. Worried that the girl in question may have been Mika, Yukari and Kazuki find out that Mr. Hirose, the chemistry teacher with the bowel issues from earlier, has more info. While the girls are running around, there are several moments where it's shown that they're being spied on by security camera. In the chemistry lab, Mr. Hirose admits that a girl died in the gym, but it wasn't Mika. It was Miki Kosaka, who was actually the other girl talking with Mika, Kazuki, and Miho in the beginning of the game when they were discussing the details of Kyoko's accident. Yukari gets in touch with Arisa, who says no one's home at Mika's apartment, so her parents may have indeed gone on a trip abroad, and that's why they haven't noticed Mika is missing. Kazuki has to head to her club, but she promises Yukari that she'll help look for Mika tomorrow. Later that night, as Kazuki leaves the school with her clubmates, she realizes that she left her bag in the chemistry room when they were talking to Mr. Hirose, and she hurries back to get it. While in the chemistry lab, she's attacked by a girl who looks like Mika, wielding the knife that Yukari and Kazuki had found in her locker. The next day, police are outside the school, and a body is covered by a tarp. Chisato tells Yukari that Kazuki allegedly fell from one of the upper floor windows of the school. It's weird that 1, the police didn't notice the stab wound on Kazuki's body, and 2, that they didn't close the school. Japan's education system is strict, man. Arisa informs Yukari that a girl from the school's newish stargazing club, Miyuki, has apparently seen Mika wandering the school at night. They go to question her in the observatory and she confirms that she saw Mika around 10 p.m. But she gets annoyed by the whole thing, saying that because of these incidents, there's a new curfew in effect and now she can't stay late at school to stargaze. The following day, Yukari is looking for Arisa and is told that she went to the observatory to talk to Miyuki again. When Yukari gets there, she doesn't find Arisa, but she does find Miyuki's mangled body hanging near the ceiling. She rushes back to school and finds Arisa, who apparently got hungry, so she ate some ramen up on the roof and took a nap. I don't know if this is the twisting of the town or whatever, but now there's 2 dead kids, and the school is still open. 2 weeks pass since Mika's disappearance, and because 2 people that Yukari and Arisa talked to concerning the issue have died, there aren't many students who are willing to help them out. The game then cuts to Miho, who receives a call from a girl named Fumiko's mother. We've never seen or heard of Fumiko up until this point, but apparently she was a friend of Miho's, and they'd been hanging out earlier in the evening, but Fumiko never made it home. Miho then calls Arisa to tell her about it, and Arisa says she'll contact Yukari and Chisato. The 4 of them enter the school, which they find is being patrolled by a police officer, and they all split up to search for Fumiko. Despite Arisa's protests that splitting up isn't such a good idea, what with girls disappearing and getting killed left and right, Yukari tells her to grow a pair and they all go their separate ways. During this portion, the girls point out some inconsistencies in the school's architecture, and also access is given to the 5th floor and the 2nd floor basement level of the north building. Both areas have signs in front of them saying students aren't allowed to enter. Arisa ends up finding Miho lying on the floor in the chemistry room with Mr. Hirose standing over her. He tells her to call an ambulance, but then starts freaking out. It's not clear whether he's actually the murderer or not, but his protestations sound convincing. It just seems like he's in shock. The police officer on patrol in the building hears the commotion and enters the room. He sees Miho's body, sees Arisa scared out of her mind, sees Hirose geeking out, and decides he's sufficiently assessed this situation, so he shoots the unarmed teacher in the chest. Policing at its finest. So Hirose apparently bleeds out as Yukari and Chisato enter the chemistry lab, while the police officer just stands there, probably patting himself on the back for a job well done. In a closet in the back of the room, they find a Mika Kishi disguise that supposedly Hirose was using to murder students with and frame Mika. Okay. Sometime later, outside the school, Arisa and the police officer are gone. Who the hell knows if anyone came in to clear up the bodies of Miho and Hirose? There's literally no one around. Not like the school is a multiple murder crime scene or anything. But Chisato isn't so sure that Hirose was the real killer, so she and Yukari head back inside to investigate further. The earlier searches led the girls to discover strange inconsistencies in the layout of the 2nd basement in the new school building, as well as the locked principal's office on the 5th floor. In the fancy new lobby of the school, Yukari and Chisato make note of the large pillar that would connect both the principal's office on the 5th floor with the walled-off area on the 2nd basement level. When they head up to the principal's office again, they find that the door that was previously locked is now open. Inside, the pillar does indeed extend into this room, and there's a switch near the floor that reveals an elevator. Heading inside, the elevator actually heads up first, and they find a room full of security monitors, along with a spreadsheet of names of girls from Mika's class. It seems like every room in the school is wired up with security cameras. Now we know how the principal knows so much about all of his students. Getting back in the elevator, this time it takes them all the way down to the bottom floor where they find a lab area. A fridge has unidentifiable body parts in jars, marked with missing or deceased students' names. None that say Mika though. And behind the pillar is a display case with a body stitched together from different female students' body parts. The head is somehow that of Kimika Takahashi's, the girl who set herself on fire at the club near the beginning of the game. How her head survived unscathed and ended up here is a mystery we'll look into later. Yukari and Chisato book it back to the elevator and up to the principal's office again. When they try to leave though, they find the door is locked. The principal's voice comes over the loudspeaker telling them they shouldn't be here and that he doesn't want them to cause any trouble. Then the elevator descends from the viewing room and the principal makes his appearance. He assumes that Yukari and Chisato have seen his collection down in the basement, as he calls it, and says the substitute is quite impressive. There's that word again, substitute. Oh Jesus, that is actually scary. And his voice doubles up while he's talking here. He says he wants to free the girls' souls from their cramped bodies and make them part of his artwork. What a kind old man. So clearly the principal was the killer, and he was the one dressing himself up like Mika, trying to frame her for the murders. For some reason. I guess his idea of framing Mika kind of blew up in his face now that she's missing, so he's kind of snapped and is just trying to kill anyone involved with Mika to make sure his secret doesn't get out. Doesn't make much sense, but look at the guy. So the principal now wants to remove Yukari and Chisato from the equation, but the moon doesn't like that one bit. And apparently its light causes the pillar in the school to collapse, creating a perfect hole for the principal to fall to his death through, leaving Yukari and Chisato unharmed. Again, we'll check it out later. This chapter ends abruptly with a shot of a waxing gibbous moon, and the voice says, "To the side." Finally, we've reached the epilogue, where all things will be explained. Ha! In the beginning of this chapter, we're actually greeted by a full moon, and the voice says, "Lunatic." The screen fades in on Chisato's face, who says that Mika will be returning soon, so she, Yukari, and Arisa head to the school to look for her. It's already been established that Chisato and Arisa possess psychic powers, but Yukari has nothing of the sort. The two Esper girls try to dissuade her from going with them, but Yukari won't give up on Mika. As the girls enter the school, Ryo also suddenly shows up outside, and he finds Rumi there too. Rumi breaks the fourth wall a bit here and says the climax is about to happen, but I don't know, I think the last chapter was pretty climactic. In any case, she wants to see what's going to happen next, but Ryo tells her to go home. She asks if Ryo was with Mika. He says he was, and he wasn't, which doesn't make any sense to Rumi, or Ryo either for that matter, or to us. So, thanks a lot. When she asks where he's been exactly, he only answers, the edge of the world. When Rumi asks where Mika is now, he just says, in there, and motions toward the school. Ryo insists that Rumi leave, that there's a pulse calling out to people from the school, luring them in. This comment calls back to the pulse that the girls were up against in the apartment complex chapter earlier in the game. We then cut to Arisa using her powers to try to locate Mika. This leads her to the 5th floor just outside the principal's office, but when she arrives at the doors, the presence she felt disappears. There's a flashback to Yukari, Chisato, and Arisa entering the school. In the lobby, the pillar is still there, even though we saw it collapse in the last chapter, and there seems to be no damage to any part of the school. I'm not going to tell you to wait until the analysis section for answers as to why this is. I have no idea on this one. Anyway, the girls made a plan to regroup in the lobby at a specified time. Yukari would wait there while Arisa and Chisato went to investigate the school. Back to the present, and Arisa, she starts to run back to the lobby to meet Yukari and Chisato, but a childish laugh stops her in her tracks. The white-haired boy appears and tells Arisa to stop interfering. Of course, Arisa doesn't relent, which leads to... shocking, yes, but not completely unexpected. There's been a feeling that something awful was going to happen to at least one of our main protagonists for some time now. Back in the lobby, Yukari notices that the time for the three of them to meet up again has passed, and the childish laugh finds her too. Chisato races to the lobby, but by the time she gets there, the boy is already with Yukari. Chisato tells Yukari to be careful, because this boy is the one who's behind everything that's happening. The kid feigns ignorance, starting to cry and act like, well, a little boy. This confuses Yukari, who thinks the whole thing must be a mistake. Chisato tells Yukari to run, but Yukari can't move her body. The boy then offers her a gift, Arisa's necklace. This breaks Yukari and brings her fully under the boy's control, and he has her walk out of the room. Then he turns to face Chisato. Okay, that one's a bit more unexpected. With her own desperate attack, Chisato manages to damage the boy, but he just heals himself. Yukari, under the boy's control, walks to the front entrance of the school, then snaps out of it. She attempts to leave, but the doors are locked. The kid is totally unhinged at this point, and, well... What the f... With the 3 girls dead, it's up to Ryo now, who enters the school and doesn't seem fazed by the remains of Yukari at the front door. Yayoi confronts him and asks why he came back. She genuinely seems desperate and concerned for his safety, but Ryo is determined to find the boy and put an end to this. Meanwhile, Chisato uses the last of her powers to revive herself. This is only her spirit though, as she's transparent walking through the school. She goes to the 5th floor and encounters Ryo. She also sees Arisa's body in the hallway and asks for her forgiveness. Chisato and Ryo make their way to the principal's office where a sword is stuck in the ground. Chisato tells Ryo that it's his role to end this story. The weapon itself has no real strength. It's just a conduit for Ryo's power. A bit of fourth wall breaking again here, as Ryo realizes that everything has been about him all along. He resolves to give meaning to the girls' deaths, but he still has some reservations about whether or not he can really win against the boy. Well, looks like we're gonna find out. The boy taunts Ryo, telling him that he's the one in control, and there's no way Ryo can possibly win against him. Standard villain stuff. So Ryo gets to slicing. The boy continues to throw out hollow threats about how Ryo is weak and unable to defeat him as his face is cut to pieces. He even comments on the fact that Ryo thinks he can still save Mika, which he says would be a boring ending, wouldn't it? When Ryo eventually lands the killing blow, there's a shot of Mika's dead body, and the boy's distorted face says, "This is the answer." Ryo finds himself at what he called earlier the edge of the world, the memory of that one day where everyone was happy. Yayoi and Sumio are there this time. Yayoi congratulates Ryo on winning. She also, interestingly, says, "You remember me, don't you? It's okay if you don't." Sumio congratulates Ryo on a job well done, but says that he wishes he was the hero of the story. Finally, Kyoko appears. She says that Ryo now has a reason to continue living and searching for meaning in life, so her death wasn't for nothing. She says at the end that she'll set Ryo free. We see the boy impaled by the sword on the roof of the school building. Yayoi approaches and says she feels sorry for him. Then Ryo runs along a path at night as the most 90s ending music ever plays over the credits. As the sky brightens and the credits reach their end, Mika stumbles toward Ryo and the two embrace. There's one final scene though. Rumi enters Ryo's apartment to find him comatose in front of his TV with the bag that contained Kyoko's head in his lap.
Ryo?
And an image of Mika's face on the TV.
Ryo.
The end. And this "thank you for playing" message just lingers on the screen, mocking you until you reset or turn off the console. Okay, well, what the fuck did we just experience? Obviously, there's a lot left to still unpack, so let me ask you, how's your knowledge of Zoroastrian mythology? First and foremost, I want to shout out the website Paradise Hotel 51 for this next portion of the video. Their analysis of Moonlight Syndrome, as well as the supplemental materials surrounding the game, such as bonus books and interviews with Suda, were hugely helpful in attempting to understand this story and formulate my own thoughts about it. I don't think the plot itself really is understandable, but the themes can be broken down and examined. The Paradise Hotel 51 site includes way more than just examinations of Moonlight Syndrome too, and I put a link in the description below if you're interested in all things Suda related. My thoughts here aren't super organized, but the story of Moonlight Syndrome isn't exactly a linear narrative, so I hope you'll forgive the jumbled nature of this section. But anyway, Let's start with the cut content. As I mentioned in the beginning of the story synopsis section, there were some chapters cut from Moonlight Syndrome. A lot of them didn't make it out of pre-production, and by reading their synopses, they seem to be only tangentially related to the main plot, with some of them including characters that never appear in the final game. There is one, however, that was fully planned and scripted, but had to be cut due to time and budget, a chapter called Inyaku, and it's actually the linchpin to understanding the mechanisms of this story. So it's really unfortunate that it wasn't included in the game. After Moonlight Syndrome's release, though, it was rewritten as a short story and included in the Moonlight Syndrome in-depth guide. The opening of Inyaku begins with a description of the god Mithra. Mithra is a figure from Zoroastrian mythology, Zoroastrianism being an early pre-Muslim religion originating in Iran, and based on the teachings of the prophet Zarathustra. Xenosaga fans rejoice. The religion also had some influence in early Rome, but there are some discrepancies in mythologies between the two regions. I'm not going to go into a full breakdown of Zoroastrianism here. All we really need to know is that Mithra was a god of oaths and contracts, and that the white-haired boy is Mithra. Though, interestingly, in actual Zoroastrian mythology, Mithra is associated with the sun, while in Moonlight Syndrome, he's associated with the moon. Maybe this is Suda's way of inferring a perversion of the Mithrian mythos. That was difficult to say. Why'd I write that sentence like that? There's also no indication in Zoroastrian belief that Mithra was a malevolent deity. So this could be the case. Anyway, our boy Mithra here is going around making contracts with different characters in Moonlight Syndrome, most significantly Ryo, but also with Kimika, the school's principal, Didu, and Sumio. All of the major events of the game are consequences of Mithra's contracts. Think of it kind of like the story of the monkey's paw. You make a wish for something, and that wish does end up coming true, but not in the way you would have liked. For example, Sumio's contract with Mithra was to separate Ryo from his sister Kyoko, with the goal being that he could then have a relationship with Kyoko without her weak little brother getting in the way. However, the outcome of that wish was Kyoko's death. But why did Sumio want to get Ryo out of the picture so badly? Well, it's clear in the game that Ryo has romantic feelings for his sister, feelings he's ashamed of and disgusted by, but he can't help having. What's unclear, though, is whether Kyoko felt the same way. We don't actually see the real Kyoko at any point in Moonlight Syndrome. We only see her in the dreams and subjective memories of Ryo. So we have no idea if Kyoko reciprocated those feelings, or if she was just incredibly worried about her quiet, sensitive little brother. Either way, Sumio became aware of Ryo's feelings and realized that Ryo's desire for his sister and Kyoko's constant concern for her little brother were a detriment to Sumio's relationship with her. He was probably even worried that Kyoko was on the verge of breaking up with him, in his mind because of the siblings' relationship, but in reality, if Kyoko wanted to break up with Sumio, it was probably because Sumio is a cold, manipulative bastard man. We don't know too much about their relationship, but from Sumio's interactions with other women, it's clear he's not a great boyfriend, or person for that matter. Sumio's womanizing could be the result of his grief over Kyoko's death, though this isn't likely because he was jealous enough to make a contract with a god to try to separate Ryo from Kyoko, and there's also the fact that he made Kimika undergo an abortion. So yeah, let's just throw out any possibility of Sumio actually being a good person. And Inyaku pretty much confirms this. After our introduction to the god Mithra, the scene transitions to just before Kyoko's death. She was actually riding on a motorcycle with Sumio, but forced him off, took off her own helmet, and crashed head-on into a truck. This is why we see Sumio and Mithra at the scene of the crash on the news report. He was right there when it happened. Kyoko told Sumio before she sped off that this is revenge. In the actual game, Kyoko tells Ryo that she killed herself for him. But remember, Kyoko is never actually in the game, and is only seen or heard through the perspective of Ryo, so this could just be his interpretation of her feelings. In reality, the reason that she ended her life could have been to escape from Sumio, and all of this was orchestrated as a result of the contract Sumio made with Mithra. The next part of Inyaku shifts to Ryo. He's having a nightmare of the moment where he was forced by police to identify the body of his sister shortly after the accident. Whether this actually occurred or not isn't clear, but he wakes up from the dream screaming. At his bedside is a photo of Ryo, Kyoko, Sumio, and Rumi all together and smiling. This is most likely on the day that they visited the grassy field. In Ryo's memory, as it's shown throughout the game, Sumio seems to care for Ryo as an older brother would. However, this is all in Ryo's head after all, so again, is this a wish to return to the way things were in reality, or a dream of how he wishes things could have been? Sumio mentions a couple times throughout the first chapter that he cares for Ryo, but a lot of it is framed in a taunting manner, so it's unclear whether or not they had a normal relationship in the past. Suda, however, clarifies this point in a Q&A by saying that Ryo and Sumio have a love-hate relationship. When things were good between Sumio and Kyoko, he showed affection towards Ryo, like an older brother, but as Sumio discovered Ryo's feelings for Kyoko and witnessed Kyoko's overbearing concern for Ryo, things became more complicated. The next scene in Inyaku has Rumi coming in to wake up Ryo. She tells him that Sumio has gone off to end his own life, and it's all Ryo's fault, because he wasn't strong enough to protect Kyoko. So now her brother is going to die because of Ryo's weakness. A weird take, but anyway, Ryo gets Sumio's location from Rumi and jumps on his own motorcycle to go find him. Everybody's got a motorcycle in this story. Meanwhile, Mika is meeting up with Kimika. The two of them are going for a drive with a character named Suzuki. Suzuki actually appears in another one of the cut chapters. He's a guy Kimika just strings along so she can be driven around in his fancy Alfa Romeo car. So Suzuki and Kimika pick up Mika, and the three of them head to Moon Bridge near Daigetsu Pass, the site of Kyoko's accident, which at this point in the story has already occurred. This scene with Mika and Kimika in Suzuki's car seems to take place in between the prologue and the second chapter of the game. When she gets in the car, Mika mentions that her classmates were talking about Kyoko's accident that morning at school. One inconsistency, though, is that later that day, in the prologue, Kazuki talks to Mika about Kimika's death that also occurred the night before. Yet here, Mika is sitting in a car with Kimika. We can either consider that because this is a cut chapter, things were altered in the finished game, or we can accept Suda's explanation that time and events are twisted in Hinashiro because of Mithra's influence. Either way, the three drive to the Moon Bridge, since it's a popular romantic spot, and Kimika mentions she wants to visit it before it becomes haunted by Kyoko's ghost. At the same time, Sumio is meeting with Yayoi near Daigetsu Pass. She tries to stop Sumio from doing whatever he's planning on doing, but Sumio tells her to be quiet or he will hear them. Sumio tells Yayoi to take care of Ryo before he drives off on his motorcycle. In the next scene, a motorcycle approaches the car that Suzuki, Kimika, and Mika are in, and they realize this is Sumio. But somehow, the car passes through the headlight of the motorcycle. Mika is unsure whether they hit him or not, so Suzuki stops the car and they all jump out to check. This is when Kimika utters the words, "I was supposed to be the one to kill him." This alludes to Kimika's own contract with Mithra, a wish to kill Sumio. Again, this could be why Kimika is then able to do just that in the first chapter of the game by setting herself and Sumio on fire. Mithra twists reality so that Kimika can have her wish granted and her contract fulfilled. Ryo ends up running into Yayoi, who confronts him about his sister complex and tells him that Kyoko also had feelings for him. We don't know if this is just a ploy or if this is the truth. She then attempts to seduce Ryo, but he resists her and speeds off. But it's clear Yayoi was only attempting to delay Ryo so he couldn't interfere with Sumio's plans. As Ryo continues on, he eventually drives up behind a car blocking his path. This is Suzuki's Alfa Romeo, which has been stolen by Kimika, who has Mika in the back seat. There's no mention of what happened to Suzuki. Kimika talks to Mika and tells her that they're heading to Sumio. She knows about all the other women Sumio is seeing, including Kyoko and Mika, but she says that she and Mika can share Sumio now. How kind. Ryo pulls up alongside the vehicle and notices Mika in the back seat, whom he mistakes for Kyoko. Kimika ends up crashing the car into a guardrail. Ryo tries to pull Mika, whom he still thinks is Kyoko, from the back seat, but she's already dead. This car accident is actually referenced in-game in the chapter where Mika has tinnitus. As she speaks nonsense to the nurse and collapses in the hallway, we hear the sound of a car crash. Then we catch a glimpse of Mika's dead body on the road in the epilogue, hinting that Mika has actually been dead all this time. We'll get back to that. To finish out Inyaku though, Mithra appears to Ryo and tells him that this girl isn't Kyoko, but Ryo is in a panic state, out of control with grief, so Mithra freezes him, much like how he freezes other characters in the game. This is when Ryo makes his contract, although somewhat unwittingly. Mithra suggests that since Ryo can't save Kyoko, he can try to save Mika instead as a substitute. As I've pointed out several times throughout the video, substitution is a major theme in both Twilight Syndrome and Moonlight Syndrome. Ryo can't speak because he's been frozen by Mithra, but Mithra takes Ryo's silence as an agreement to this plan to save Mika. He tells Ryo that in order to fulfill the contract, Mithra will take the first person that Ryo embraces. So Mithra has set up this catch-22 situation, just for his own amusement, where Ryo must try to save Mika, knowing full well that Mika will be the one Ryo embraces, so Mithra will just end up taking Mika's life anyway. It's fucked up. So Mika continues living, in a sense, throughout the events of Moonlight Syndrome, only so Ryo will come to embrace her to fulfill his contract with Mithra. Mithra's twisting of reality in service of the contracts he creates is also apparent in several other scenes within the actual game. The first being Kyoko's head in the bag that Yayoi holds. According to the details of Kyoko's accident, there wasn't much left of her body, but the head is there because it's needed to help push Ryo forward, accept Kyoko's death, and begin to pursue Mika. Similarly, the principal of the school made a contract with Mithra to complete his artwork. Even though Kimika died by setting herself on fire, her head is preserved for the principal's collection because that was the condition of the principal's contract. The principal was also probably able to pass for Mika thanks to Mithra's twisting of reality. Think about it, in that cutscene when the imposter Mika kills Kazuki, doesn't look like an old man, with a beard mind you, is dressed up as a schoolgirl wearing a wig, looks like Mika. There's also another element of appearance shifting when it comes to Riru, who also had a contract with Mithra. She appears to Nana as Arisa to lure Nana out of her apartment. But anyway, back to Ryo. Even though Mika is the one we control throughout most of the game, Ryo is the main character of this story. He says as much in the epilogue. Everything Mika suffered is in pursuit of Ryo fulfilling his contract with Mithra. Mika was toyed with in order for Ryo to develop a desire to protect her. Inyaku ends with a scene that we actually see in the game after the credits roll. Ryo spots Mika stumbling along the path and ends up embracing her to stop her from falling. But this was the condition of Mithra's contract, that he would take the life of whoever Ryo embraced. So the cut chapter ends with Mithra's laughter resounding around them. So, yeah, Inyaku clarifies who the white-haired boy is and some of the reasons why certain things happen in the story, but I don't think that necessarily makes the story any less confusing. I'm honestly on the fence about all of this. Like, is this good storytelling? Or is the inclusion of Mithra, a god who can bend reality, just a Deus Ex Machina patch for a story that doesn't actually make any sense? Does it really matter? Are the themes and what a story has to say in regards to social commentary and shedding light on real-world problems more important than a satisfying structure? These are questions you'll have to answer for yourself. From playing his other games, Suda is definitely a creator who's more concerned with the mechanisms of storytelling, like how they work in an abstract sense, and he enjoys breaking those mechanisms in service of his own message and style. Facing Moonlight Syndrome's plot head-on though, my question is, did Mithra know that by pushing Ryo to protect Mika that it would end in his own demise? One possibility is probably not, because the sword that Ryo uses to kill Mithra is presented to him by Chisato, who is a force outside of Mithra's control. Chisato and Arisa were both against Mithra, and even though they themselves weren't strong enough to take Mithra down, Chisato used the last of her powers to guide Ryo. While we're on the topic of Chisato, there's also Yayoi, Chisato's younger sister, who is an agent of Mithra. In the Q&A with Suda, he confirms that both Chisato and Yayoi were a fusion of other Zoroastrian deities, with Chisato on the side of light and Yayoi on the side of darkness. Even though Yayoi is Mithra's servant, she does seem to have some autonomy. She shows concern for Ryo near the end of the game before he goes to confront Mithra. She also more directly involves herself in events that are the result of Mithra's contracts. One big example is the apartment complex chapter. These events are the result of Riru's agreement with Mithra. I believe Riru's wish was to be noticed by her own father, who, most likely, like the businessman on the train in the chapter where Mika is able to read people's thoughts, is so imprisoned by his own job that he has no time for his family. The other kids' deaths are a result of this contract, a cry for help for someone to notice these junior high school students' pain. Yayoi is there helping to guide things so that Riru will ultimately be the one to jump, ironically reuniting her with her father. But the consequence of this wish is that Riru's father is killed while she survives. You might be thinking, why did all those other kids have to die if this was Riru's wish? Well, besides the whole monkey's paw concept of wish fulfillment going on here, I think it also has to do with the theme of substitution. Everyone is trying, either intentionally or unintentionally, to push responsibility off of themselves and force it onto others. All these people full of contradictions, interacting with each other, as Arisa puts it on the train while trying to explain her messed up dream to Mika. Much like the older residents of Hinashiro used dolls as substitutes in hopes of avoiding misfortune, which eventually turned into using real girls as sacrifices, all of these characters are hoping to sacrifice others in order to avoid having to take responsibility themselves. Back to whether or not Mithranua's contract with Ryo would lead to his death, though, there's also a meta element to that. Some of the taunts Mithra throws at Ryo compares him to a video game character. He talks about Ryo having to grind and level up to beat him. Everything in Moonlight Syndrome seems to end up this way, having just multiple interpretations. There are no easy answers. Its events and themes are meant to be turned over and examined from different angles, each view offering new possible explanations. It's a meditation on ideas rather than a linear narrative. And as I said, this is true for a lot of Suda's work. Speaking of which, before I wrap things up here, what about that final scene with Rumi and Ryo in front of the TV? Well, not to leave you hanging or anything, though I'm going to. This is actually something that will get a continuation and resolution in the very first chapter of The Silver Case, Suda's next game. And since I plan on covering The Silver Case, I'll save those examinations for another time. I guess that's also a fitting way to end this section, without resolution, much like Moonlight Syndrome itself. After the completion of Moonlight Syndrome, Suda would leave Human Entertainment and take several key staff with him to form Grasshopper Manufacture in 1998. He claimed that he could foresee Human's bankruptcy was imminent, and he was right. Human Entertainment filed for bankruptcy a couple years later in 2000. As for the Twilight Syndrome series, its rights were sold to developer Spike, who created another PlayStation sequel in 2000 called Reunion. This game ignored the events of Moonlight Syndrome and stars a new group of protagonists. However, it is mentioned that Mika Kishi became a paranormal photographer popular in the occult magazine circle. So Moonlight Syndrome, conceived by Suda as a sequel and released as such at the time, was relegated to a non-canon side story with the release of subsequent Twilight Syndrome games. The last we've seen of the series was a DS outing from 2008, again developed by Spike. While I've not really delved too much into these games, from Japanese reviews at the time, it seems like they were well received. Back to Suda though, Grasshopper Manufacture's first release was The Silver Case, which would really launch the studio and Suda's career and eventually lead to the creation and international release of Killer 7, probably his most well-known game, at least up until No More Heroes came out. But yeah, Suda has made a name for himself by eschewing genre conventions and telling really weird, mind-bending stories. But all of that got its start during his time at Human Entertainment and came to fruition with Moonlight Syndrome. While I think overall I enjoyed actually playing through the Twilight Syndrome games more than Moonlight Syndrome, it's clear that conceptually, Moonlight Syndrome has much more to chew on. The Twilight Syndrome games can easily be played on their own and enjoyed for their straightforward, spooky, paranormal investigations, as well as their surprisingly deep character studies and well-developed main cast. I don't think the same can be said for Moonlight Syndrome. I feel like without Twilight Syndrome as a foundation, anyone jumping straight into Moonlight would miss out on a lot of the character depth, growth, and change that the sequel spends so much time ruminating on. But unfortunately, at this time, the majority of players can't experience any of these games. So I hope this video provided a thorough enough look at them to keep you invested. And I hope someday that a fan translation comes along so more people can get involved in the conversation around these games and their strange themes and ideas. There's so much stuff being translated nowadays, so there's always hope. And that's it for Twilight Syndrome and Moonlight Syndrome. Thank you so much for watching. This was another long one, though when I set out to make it, I didn't expect it to be this long. I just kept amassing notes as I played through all the games, and those notes only expanded when I found the Paradise Hotel 51 site, and well, here we are. I don't know if my analysis of the story made things any clearer, but that wasn't really the point. I didn't set out to try to make sense of these games. I just wanted to show them off for people who couldn't play through them on their own. So, if you enjoyed this video in any way, shape, or form, please like it, leave a comment, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I've got many more videos planned, and ones coming up that won't take me over a month to make. I promise. If you really like what I do, then please consider supporting by becoming a patron or a YouTube member. Become a Dungeon Dweller. You'll get to watch videos a couple of days before I make them public on YouTube, get exclusive updates from me, be able to vote in occasional polls on what I cover next, and watch bonus videos. There's a bonus video currently available on the Patreon and YouTube member feed. It's a short review of a Japanese-only PS1 horror game called Kawaii Shashin. So if you're interested in watching that, become a supporter like all these people on screen. If you donate $5 or more each month, you'll also get your name read out loud at the end of videos like these Dungeon Architects. Antichrist Alex, Benifer94, Chaos Arcanum, Dan, Danny Kilpatrick, David Carr, Dirt Possum, Eugene, Glen Haven, Goats and Goblins, Half HP, High Food Court, Izzy Lexus, J Bud Airline, John B, Joshua Ayers, Justin Darnell, Kale, Captain Ketchup, Kevin Hanley, Crunk Wizard, Kyowa, Lunar Veil, Meownarchy, Mr. Loser, Mr. Eater, Nick Wolf, Ningax, Nom Daguerre, Razor Raycox, Rez, Richard Cutting, Richard Sanchez, Shannon Gates, Vinci, and White Like Eyes, as well as these dungeon connoisseurs. Adon, Alberto Amatucci, Alfred Correa, Andy Rahman, Andrew Tovaniti, Andy Kaiju, Anjan01, Arrested Rabbit, Burger Von Burger, Bewildering Avocado, Big Farty Nuts, Blue Mantis, Boneside, Bunzo, Captain Swing, Churm Slurm, Chiral Spiral, Claire Myers, Combo Trigger, Concrete Mascara, Crassus Zero, Crippler Jones, Daniel Johnson, Daniel Talo, David West, Days Clockwork, Dikadiko, Doroko, Dungeon Chili, Fangro, Glitterthroat, Hokom Boyum, Harvey Bodega, Icehammer 82, Indigo Happy, Irregular Rob, Jack Roberts, James Ray, Jason Cook, Gemma, Jet Daddy, Joe Goth Jolly Bean, Joshua Weber, Karen Rosenow, Lady Nagram, Leica Come Home, Lampshader, Liana, Lux Custodes, Mira, Macrophage, Man with Confetti, Masakishi, Matthew Wall, Matt Norrid, Michael Oliver, Minced Meat, Mr. Independent, Nicholas Polstar, Nito Ree, Noel the Monkey, Old Dead Lemons, Olaf Albine, Please Keep Making Videos, Prince Goof, Ribbon Black, Roland, S, Sable, Salty Groove, Samuel Pandiangan, Sensei Wolfman, Shark King, Sean, Cicerin, Skyclad Weeb, Slycat, Solar, Sorbet, Spencer Newton, T, Talon Idu, TCB, The Stoic One, Toops, Tor Dragon, True Axiom, Tuesday Twin, TV's Brent, Violet the Insatiable, Warrior Song, Where Am I, Help, Wolfenheim, and Zach Diedrich. Thank you all for your support, and thank you once again for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, well, normally I would say Twilight Syndrome and Moonlight Syndrome, check them out, but I guess most people can't, so I'll just say Dungeon Chill, out.